And the paramedic who was there, he looked around and could see that there'd been an untidy search. Some drawers were open, some things were knocked over.
Items were strewn across the floor, drawers were open.
Here is a lady who's died with the cover over her head, with the arms raised above the head, and it looks like there's been a burglary that's taken place.
With police at the scene, suspicions grow that this is not a natural death, and the house is immediately cordoned off. But with no obvious injuries, how Jane died is still a mystery, which means detectives begin to theorize what could have happened to the pensioner.
Is it a burglary that's gone wrong? Is it Jane who's suffered a heart attack following a burglary, or whether she has passed away and then a burglary has happened afterwards, or whether this is somebody who has murdered Jane and then burgled the bungalow afterwards?
The first step for detectives is to establish how Jane died.
I received a phone call from the duty detective inspector who said they had a death. They weren't 100% happy with it, and they would value my opinion on what was going on.
Dr. Hamilton attends the scene, and as well as the unusual way Jane has been tucked into her bed, his suspicions are raised further.
And the most immediately concerning thing was that her nightdress appeared to be pulled up, and that seemed very unusual for somebody who'd simply died in their sleep. This just doesn't look right, it doesn't look normal.
As suspicions are raised that she could have been the victim of a sexual attack, Jane is taken for post-mortem. But almost immediately, everything changes.
This is HFM.
Police have launched a murder inquiry after an elderly woman was found dead at her home in Fleckney. The body was discovered in a bungalow on Elizabeth Road. It's thought the victim died at some point during Saturday evening or in the early hours of Sunday.
Whilst transporting Jane, a shocking piece of evidence has been found.
As we took the body, a tongue bar fell from one of the creases in the skin. Ms. Hings didn't have a tongue piercing, so we have evidence of somebody else very close to her body. That ultimately became one of the most important pieces of evidence in catching the killer.
On a quiet Sunday morning in the village of Fleckney in Leicestershire, residents are waking up to disturbing news of a possible murder on their doorstep.
This is HFM.
Further tests are being carried out to try to determine what killed an elderly woman in her own home in Fleckney. It prompted police to launch a murder inquiry following the discovery of her body in the property on Elizabeth Road. There were signs of a disturbance in her bungalow, which has led officers to believe she may have been the victim of a burglary.
72-year-old Jane Hings has been found dead by her carers early on a Sunday morning. Her house has been burgled, and there's signs she has been sexually assaulted. Police are treating her death as suspicious and have cordoned off the scene.
There was police tape from the tree round to the lamppost. You couldn't get to where, if you can just see that red car behind this thing, that was all blocked off as well, because that's the back of her house. It's not something we expected to ever happen in Fleckney. It's such a quiet village, a nice village. I was gobsmacked. There's something could happen like this, you know what I mean, on my doorstep, literally on my doorstep. And for people that I knew.
It's a place where you could leave your doors and windows open. Everybody knows everybody. But, you know, this sent shockwaves through the community. And I think that a lot of people would have felt generally scared.
With the village inundated with police vehicles, Jane's loved ones are also confronted with the news of her death.
I'd arranged to go over to Jane's on the Sunday morning to take Paddy for a walk. And as usual, I was running late and I'd had no phone call. which was really strange. And then I pulled into the close where she lived and just saw loads of police cars, police vans, forensics, and yeah, that's when I found out. So I last spoke to Jane the night before. I was supposed to go and see her that day. I'd been on holiday, so I hadn't seen her for a couple of weeks. And we were on the phone for about an hour. I miss Jane. I miss the phone calls. There was so much she could have talked about her life, and I didn't get to hear any of it. And my phone is so deadly quiet all the time.
Whilst moving Jane's body, pathologists have discovered a tongue bar in her groin.
The investigation then shifted from, is this a burglary that's gone wrong, to this is an old lady who's been murdered and seriously sexually assaulted in her home.
That tongue bar was put into an evidence bag immediately. Everyone knew that this was potentially important. That went straight off. It was fast-tracked through the DNA lab.
As detectives wait for the DNA results, utmost on their mind is that this might not be an isolated incident.
One of our first lines of inquiry is to research cases of a similar nature, and we conducted a number of checks looking at anybody who was already convicted and in prison who could have been on day release for the same offence. But then this case was one of a kind. Not only the nature of it, but the brutal nature of it.
Immediately, door-to-door inquiries begin.
When officers initially attended the scene, they tried to identify people who would know Jane the last time that she was seen or spoken to.
Officers investigate whether Jane had any enemies in the village.
When we looked at Jane's past, there was no fallouts with anybody. There was nothing to indicate somebody with a vendetta, somebody with a grudge, any past history with anybody which would tell us this person has a long-running grudge against Jane and would want ill of her.
But locals have their own suspicions.
When the police first came, they said there was no sign of forced entry or anything like that, so it was obvious that it was somebody that she knew.
And it appears that whoever stole from Jane took some of her most precious items. Her wedding ring and a necklace are missing, along with her mobile phone, handbag, and £200. But police find an item they suspect doesn't belong to her.
Behind that bed, between the headboard and the wall, was a baseball cap found on the floor.
It was a designer cap, something that didn't belong to Jane.
The question police want to know is, whose hat is it? And did its owner have anything to do with Jane's death? With the post-mortem results in, it's apparent Jane has suffered a brutal attack.
Really tellingly, she had lacerations, she had tears, both to her anus and to her vagina. The external injuries were really focused around the mouth and the nose and the upper neck area. Ms. Hings didn't have that many injuries on her body, but what there was told a story. There was a little linear graze, a scratch on her neck, and we know that her necklace was missing. It would certainly fit with somebody having pulled that necklace and it scraping across the skin. The most important thing that the post-mortem brought out in itself was that there was no natural cause for her to die. No natural cause for Miss Hings to be dead. In addition, there was some quite disturbing bruising around her jawline, around her mouth, something that really makes you think we have to be sure that this woman hasn't been strangled or smothered.
Less than 24 hours after Jane was discovered, the fast turnaround DNA profile from the tongue bar is returned from the lab.
That profile was put into the DNA database, and they soon had a match. They had a hit, and that match was Craig Kehoe.
26-year-old Craig Kehoe's DNA was on file, as he was known to the local police as a petty criminal. Now, he was part of a major manhunt.
Craig Kehoe was a local lad. He grew up in the area. He still lived in the area. Craig led a transient lifestyle. He doesn't have a car, he didn't have a phone, he didn't have a job, he didn't claim benefits. So trying to work out where he lived in the Fleckney area meant we had to do a lot of inquiries at a fast pace, but in a discreet way as well.
Police managed to trace Craig to a caravan which was on the outskirts of Fleckney, but not very far from where Jane lived.
Once we'd identified that he was living in a caravan, we sent officers there.
Someone in the caravan! Police! Open the door! Police, open the door! Someone with a dark hair in there.
And there was a slight standoff of about 30 seconds where the caravan was surrounded and Craig took some time coming to the door before he's arrested.
Right, hands behind back.
Right, at this moment in time, I'm arresting on suspicion of murder. The rest is necessary for prompt and effective investigation. You don't have to say anything. May harm to face. Do not mention one question. Something which later will lie in the court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand everything I've said to you?
Craig is taken into custody as detectives try to build a picture of the young man they suspect murdered Jane.
He didn't live far from Jane. He was a former factory worker. He'd been in trouble for burglary, a few break-ins and stealing from his parents and from a friend. But he wasn't known as a major criminal. He wasn't known for anything as horrific as this.
As Craig's DNA was identified on the tongue bar and in her bungalow, detectives want to know how it got there. Craig is interviewed under caution.
When was the last time you saw her then?
The last time I saw her was Sunday night.
Okay. What time would that have been?
I got there for about 10:30.
You got there at 10:30?
Yeah.
That's PM?
About 10:30 at night.
At night? Okay. So if we take from 10:30 at night then, through to when you left at 11,
Yeah.
tell me exactly in detail what happened.
Well, I was watching a little film on the TV, and then she asked me to have sex with her again.
Just tell me exactly what she said to you about having sex.
She just said, Craig, will you have sex with me? And then, well, the first time it started off was about a month ago, and I was in the house, and then she just came into the front room naked, and then she was like, Craig, come and do it with me and I'll pay you.
He offered the reason that his DNA was inside of Jane and inside the scene was because Jane had paid him for sex.
Okay, and how much did she pay you?
Yeah, she paid me £200.
£200.
In the village of Fleckney in Leicestershire, police have arrested 25-year-old Craig Kehoe on suspicion of the murder of Jane Hings.
Do not have to say anything. May harm to face. Do not mention one question. Something which later will lie in the court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand everything I've said to you?
Could this local lad really be responsible for the rape and murder of a 72-year-old pensioner? The news has sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community.
How could somebody that I'd grown up with all these years could be physically capable of doing something like that? I felt sick and it was horrible. Like, who does things like that? To such, you know what I mean? You hear about it, but she was an old lady. She was old. He was a young lad.
Kehoe has been taken into custody and is being interviewed under caution. With his DNA found on the victim and at the scene, detectives want to know how Craig knows Jane. And he has an explanation.
I was walking through the village and I saw this lady and her shopping bag broke and I helped her and then I carried it to the house with her.
Craig told us in an interview that he met Jane when he was down the shops and that she asked him to pick up some shopping for him and offered him some money for it and then asked him to walk her dog, Paddy, as well.
But Craig alleges that it wasn't just household chores Jane was paying him for.
And then another time, she's asked me to have sex with her for money. And it happened a month ago, the first time. And then she's asked me to come back a month later. And then it happened again.
Key to the police investigation was the tongue piercing found in Jane's groin.
Have you got any piercings?
I got my ear pierced.
Your ear pierced? Okay. Anywhere else?
Yeah, my tongue pierced.
Your tongue?
Craig goes on to admit that he'd been with Jane the night she died, saying he arrived at her house around 10:30 p.m.
Tell me exactly in detail what happened.
Well, I was watching a little film on the TV, and then she asked me to have sex with her at the end, and she's like, "I'll pay you more this time." I was like, "Okay." I didn't think anything of it, and that was it really. And she said she felt sick, and then I left her.
Craig's detailed account that he had sex with Jane and left her very much alive turns the investigation on its head.
During the course of his interviews, he came up with an explanation as to what happened. And I have to say, it was so bizarre.
Craig also suggested that Jane, whilst alive, was unwell when he left.
What he was saying was that she'd become a little bit wobbly and a little bit unwell, and had then gone back to her bed. He'd then closed the door, and obviously whatever happened afterwards was someone else. Some stranger, no doubt having seen that the door was open, would have gone in there, burgled her, and perhaps killed her. And so that might possibly have been an explanation for what happened.
The interviewing officers had to keep an open mind, but had to probe and get as much detail from him as possible to find out whether it was right or not.
Was Craig telling the truth? Was Jane alive when he left? And so was it someone else who sexually assaulted and killed her? Forensics carry out a detailed search for additional DNA or fingerprints on Jane or in the bungalow.
There was nothing else from the scene, from Jane, from the post-mortem which identified anybody else other than Craig. We'd had all of these things examined and they only pointed at Craig Keogh and did not point to anybody else.
With no one else in the frame, Craig's movements on the night in question are investigated.
Craig had been on a night out in Oadby, a nearby town.
I think it was between 8:30 he came in that night. Remember it well because Leicester City had played Liverpool on that night, so we had a fair few in. He stood out straight away because he had his baseball cap the other way around and he was just bouncing up and down.
Staff at the pub said that he appeared agitated, aggressive, and almost as if he was up for a fight. They said he was high on drink and drugs.
Now, this was crucially important evidence because in his interviews, he'd said that by 10:30 that evening, he was sitting in Jane Hing's living room in Fleckney, watching a war film and having a drink with her. But that was a lie. He was out with his friends. We were able by that process to show that he'd taken cocaine, that he was offering to sell other people cocaine, and that he was complaining about how boring the evening was.
As doubt is cast on Keogh's version of events, police trace his movements after he leaves the pub. He's next seen arriving back in Fleckney at just after 1 a.m.
His friends say that the last time they saw him was when the taxi dropped him off and they assumed he was going home.
But Keogh walks in the opposite direction of his caravan, heading in the direction of Jane's bungalow.
We knew from CCTV that the suspect had walked to Jane's house wearing a baseball cap, and when they were walking away they didn't have it on, and we could see that.
Detectives believe this places Keogh in Jane's bungalow around 1:15 a.m. And when he returns home, he's captured again.
We see him going back into his caravan, carrying something. Now, he goes out again, and he returns out around 2:30 in the morning for another 15 minutes or so, and we are certain that he went back to Jane Hing's house in that period of time. We don't know what he did.
The following morning, Craig is again seen on camera.
The morning after he was seen walking along the street, he was captured on CCTV with a black bin bag.
He's spotted again a few minutes later, but the bag has vanished. What did he dispose of? The police believe it was some of Jane's belongings, but a search of the area reveals nothing.
This is HFM.
It's 5 o'clock. This is HFM News. Detectives have been given more time to continue questioning a man on suspicion of murder following the discovery of a pensioner dead in her bungalow in Fleckney on Sunday morning. Officers also believe items were stolen from Miss Hings's bungalow in a black bin liner. They're appealing for villagers to check their gardens and outbuildings in case it's been discarded there. A post-mortem examination has so far failed to identify her cause of death.
With help from the public and CCTV, police are able to piece together Keogh's movements 24 hours after Jane's death. Friends described Craig as splashing his cash, buying them drinks and himself a new tongue bar.
He tried to get rid of Jane's jewellery in trying to sell it. He got rid of her handbag. He was trying to get rid of every last bit of evidence that would connect him to Jane.
He went into Leicester city centre and he actually went to a pawnbroker's. He sold her jewellery for about £100 when the items of jewellery were valued around £1,000.
With enough evidence that Keogh stole items from Jane and had raped her, detectives also believe they have a killer on their hands. But proving he murdered Jane was going to be their biggest challenge.
So far as murder was concerned, we had no cause of death. We were unable to show how she died, whether it was deliberate or accidental, forensically at that stage.
In the village of Fleckney, 25-year-old Craig Keogh has been charged with burglary, murder, and the rape of pensioner Jane Hings. The news that Jane was sexually assaulted in her home has been made public.
The community were on edge already, knowing that an old lady had been murdered in her home, but then once the true nature of it came out, people were really worried.
When I found out that information, it just floored me. It played on my mind all night. You know, a woman of that age, why could that happen?
I'd say the villagers would be distressed because a majority of them are similar sort of age to Miss Hinks. And there's quite a few vulnerable people out there as well, and it obviously upset them, but also put a bit of fear into them as well, that this could happen on their doorstep.
Within days of his arrest, Keogh is brought before a judge and the charges read.
He pleaded not guilty to all the charges. So that was murder, 2 counts of rape and burglary.
Keogh is remanded in custody and a date set for his trial. But the work of the prosecution is only just beginning.
This was horrific violence perpetrated on a very frail old lady whilst she was still alive. And there was then the added complication of trying to prove how she died.
So one of Craig Keogh's lines of defence actually referred to him knowing Jane Hings, and yeah, he said that she paid him for sex, and that was a reason that he went around and he claimed she was still alive when he left her bungalow on that night.
Experts believe that Jane has been smothered with a pillow, and proving it was Keogh is imperative to the case.
The DNA on the pillows was of saliva, and so we could show that Jane's saliva was on the pillows. That was all.
Typically with a material object, you can't get fingerprints from it. And it's really difficult. For us as investigators, we sat there believing that the pillowcases were our murder weapon. How could we prove that?
With concern that Keogh might get away on a technicality, the police and prosecution reach out to forensic specialists.
Now, our pillowcases had been sat in the bottom of an evidence bag, sat in an exhibit store for, at this point, 4 months. They weren't laid out flat like you'd see in a movie or anything like this. This is a pillowcase shoved in the bottom of an evidence bag.
But as we got nearer to trial, we discovered a new scientific development.
Leicestershire Police said to me they had a pillowcase that they were interested in trying to develop some fingerprints on. They wanted to know whether a novel process I'd been researching was appropriate for this type of exhibit. I recommended that they tried vacuum metal deposition, and I also directed them towards Gloucestershire Police, who had a vacuum metal deposition machine that they could use and a trained operator, which is probably the best technique that we're aware of that gives you a chance of getting fingerprints on fabrics.
Vacuum metal deposition involves vaporizing gold and zinc in a vacuum chamber. The metallic particles are attracted to the fabric and form a negative image of finger marks wherever it has been touched.
So what you have here is the image of the pillowcase as it's come out of the vacuum metal deposition machine. These dark regions where you have quite a lot of zinc deposition, and you have these light regions where zinc simply hasn't deposited. It shows whereabouts the pillowcase has been gripped, and it also enables you to say, well, it's been touched there, so you can then target other techniques such as DNA recovery for those techniques.
We were able, therefore, to show that the pillow had been held in a position that you wouldn't hold a pillow ordinarily in order to put it over Jane Hings' head to kill her.
So that proved our murder weapon. We had Keogh's finger marks on the short edge and Jane's saliva in the middle of the pillow.
But the question is, would it be enough to convict Keogh? The trial begins at Birmingham Crown Court, and Jane's friends come face to face with Keogh.
Craig was just deadpan through the whole entire time. Not an ounce of remorse, not any kind of emotion. He showed nothing.
When Craig sat in the dock, he was expressionless. It was difficult to really see any signs of emotion.
Obviously, Jane's friends are of her age, so are a lot older and didn't want to go and sit through all of that. So I went and sat for her. I didn't want Craig to think that nobody cared about her. I wanted to be seen that, you know, she meant something to somebody.
Craig had denied all along that he was responsible for raping and murdering Jane Hings. In fact, his version of events was at complete odds with the prosecution's case, the police case, he had said that he had gone to see Jane to have sex. He said that they had watched a film together that night, a war film. Checks were made, and there was no war film on TV. It was a complete and utter lie.
As the trial unfolds, the defence tried to paint a picture of Jane.
Craig Keogh was describing Jane Hings as being a sexually promiscuous, drunken woman who liked nothing more than spending her pension money on having intercourse with a young man. We discovered she didn't drink alcohol. There was no alcohol in her bloodstream after her death.
So the jury were then shown all the mobility aids that Jane had in the house, the fact that she couldn't walk between rooms without needing a walking stick or a frame.
So the idea of her being interested in active sexual activity was laughable.
Central to the prosecution case is proving that the sexual contact was non-consensual.
So we instructed an expert in sexual injuries to examine her body. And as a result of that, we were able to show that the sexual activity was not consensual activity, and it would have caused her significant amounts of pain, and it happened when she was alive.
And it was for this reason they believe Keogh decided to kill Jane.
She must have cried out when that happened, and he must have wanted not to be caught and to complete the act. And we know he did complete the act because there was semen within her body. And I expect that during the course of that sexual assault upon her, he decided to kill her because she wouldn't shut up.
Establishing that Keogh had the motive and opportunity to kill Jane, the prosecution introduces what they believe is the murder weapon.
The scientists went the extra mile on this one because they could show that finger marks left by Keogh were on the short, straight edges at the side, and they were gripped like this and applied. And they then took it one step further to look for the amylase staining, that's the protein staining in the middle, to show that Jane had exhaled a lot and it given out a lot of moisture from her breath, indicating that that's where she was smothered. And then when the scientists came to court to explain it, the jury was sat there like, oh wow, this is really impactful.
With the prosecution evidence built against him, Keogh remained silent.
Craig sat there very quiet. He chose not to give evidence. He chose not to be cross-examined by prosecutor, and he showed no remorse, even when the horrific details were read out of what he had done.
Craig Keogh could not offer any evidence which the jury could look at and say that he was not guilty. He couldn't offer any alibi, and he couldn't offer any plausible explanation as to why this had happened or why he was suspected of it.
After 5 days, the jury is sent to deliberate. Presented with all the evidence, they have to decide whether the marks at the edge of the pillow and all the new scientific data prove that the young man in front of them is a murderer.
There are two choices for a jury here. Either he went into that house and raped her and burgled the property and then left, and a random stranger came in and smothered her, or the person who raped her smothered her. That's the choice.
Even though you've listened to the whole trial and you know he's guilty, that evidence says he's guilty, those minutes, hours of waiting to hear them words, it's still nerve-wracking, you know, because they could come back with not guilty.
After 4 hours, the jury returns.
They came back and unanimously said that he was guilty of 2 counts of rape, murder and burglary.
When the jury came back, he was plainly shocked. Craig Keogh stood there, and when sentence was imposed, he stood there with an element of resignation, but he didn't seem at any stage to show any kind of remorse. No sadness for her, no sadness for his own family, who appeared to be very decent people. From the beginning to the end, it seemed to me he was entirely focused on himself.
Keogh was given a life sentence and will only be eligible for parole after 32 years. But for all involved, this case has taken its toll.
When I went into Jane Hing's house, I was struck by the peace and tranquility in which she'd lived her life. She was a very simple lady. Beside her bed on one side was her Bible and a crucifix. And on the other side, as she had gone to bed, no doubt like every other night, she'd left her teeth on the side of the bed. And imagining just being in your own bedroom, in the comfort of your own home, and having a young, strong man, plainly intoxicated and under the influence of drunks, coming into your room about 1:15 in the morning, waking you from your sleep, must have been terrifying. That, I think, stays with me.
This case will stick with me. It's one that the community will remember for a long time. It's one that the police officers who went to will remember for a long time.
I've covered numerous murder trials over the last 25 years. The rape of anyone is distressing, it's shocking, but this was particularly shocking because it involved the rape of an elderly woman.
I've been asked many times, what are my feelings towards Craig? And I have none, is the simple answer. I don't hate him because that's an emotion. I literally have no emotion towards him. But to think of what he did, it broke my heart to try and think about the fear that would have been going through her mind at the time. And then to be smothered with her own pillow. Jane was cremated and I put her ashes in an urn that sits on my mantelpiece so she can watch over Paddy every day until the day that he sadly joins her, in which case I will get him cremated and scatter their ashes someplace nice. Are you gorgeous? So they can be together again.
Stranger danger is rare but not impossible. The chilling Murdered at First Sight is new Wednesday at 9 on Sky Mix.
It's an emergency. I've just walked in and found my mother's body lying there, uncompletely dead.
It was fairly obvious this was going to be a big story.
We've spent millions of pounds on this investigation, the most expensive investigations that Hampshire police have ever run.
That type of thing doesn't happen around here. Why was this little old lady killed?
This is a murder.
Nestled beside the River Itchen sits the pretty hamlet of Brambridge.
Brambridge is typical of these tiny little hamlets that have got very, very few homes there. Everyone really knows everyone. It's a very friendly kind of place, and you've got your little store, and all community life is around those areas. It attracts a lot of visitors simply because of the River Itchen. There are lovely walks along the river there. Again, one of the most beautiful spots in England. Brambridge is most definitely one of the loveliest.
This picturesque part of Hampshire often attracts a slower pace of life.
It was always predominantly sort of an elder generation place, so people around here were sort of over 50s, 60s.
The community is an aged community. It's not an awful lot of very young people. There are some young people, of course, homes with kids and so on, but the majority of the community is older people.
The Hampshire Hogs, as they're known, they're very proud of their area. The local people who have been here for generations. And, yeah, like everywhere where it's village life, it's lovely.
At the very edge of Brambridge lived a wealthy 77-year-old grandmother, Georgina Edmonds.
Everything that was said about Georgina Edmonds was just a lovely, lovely lady. Well-liked and loved by everyone that knew her, very close to her family, very friendly, and just a charming old lady.
She had grandchildren that she really enjoyed playing with, was always up for a bit of a laugh. Her grandson was a budding filmmaker, and he would make funny little videos at Christmas, and Georgina would star in those as well. And she enjoyed life, you know, she was still very independent, she was still mobile. She drove her car, she would go down to the shops, but she had assistance with that as well.
Well, I knew her because one of the jobs I did at work was, you know, to take the groceries to the dear old souls who couldn't get around. I know she always had her little dogs with her, rather sweet little things. Very, very friendly. They used to stand up at the window and look out of the window. She was a, you know, a delightful person, and nothing to say about her that wasn't nice.
Georgina lived in a large gated estate on the edge of the river.
The Edmonds family were well known in the area. It was Georgina's husband who had founded the family business importing coffee.
Very well-to-do family. Harry, her son, worked in London. The business, I believe, was in Basingstoke. But again, most of the time, they were up in London working hard and would come back to Hampshire at weekends, you know, for rest.
When Georgina's husband sadly passed away, she downsized into the smaller house on the estate.
She moved into the cottage, which is your chocolate box cover cottage itself.
Nice little house, you know, amongst the trees, by the river.
Her son, Harry, took over running the business and moved into the larger house, as you would when you reach an older age. You don't want the bother of all the dusting.
Georgina seemed happy in her new home. But in January 2008, life in the community changes forever.
Police emergency.
This is an emergency. I've just come down to my house. My mother has a cottage 100 yards away.
Right.
I've got no reply from her. I've come in through her bedroom window, which was unlocked. She's lying on the floor in the kitchen, and it looks to me as if she's been hit over the head. She looks as if she's dead.
OK, calm down for me, sir. What's your name?
My name is Harry Edmonds. I'm her son. I've just walked in. I came in through the window, and I found the house in complete darkness. I've gone through into the kitchen and found my mother's body lying there, and I've been out walking her dogs. This looks like a crime scene to me.
OK, well, try not to touch anything for me.
This is a murder.
OK, just calm down for me, sir. I'll send someone else for you, OK?
Yeah, please, as soon as possible. I'm sick, she's dead. That's a murder.
It was about 6:15. I was at home, just prepping dinner, and my phone rang, and so I answered the phone, and they said, we've got a suspicious death. I said, OK, tell me about that. And they said, it's an elderly woman been found dead in the kitchen, face down by her son. So I jumped in the car, and it was a miserable, wet, cold January night, blowing a gale, driving through these country roads as we are now.
Paul Barton, Detective Chief Inspector at the time, arrives at Georgina's address, which is already swarmed with a significant police presence.
So just as I'm pulling down here, I could see the blue lights sort of flashing in the pitch black. So I know I'm getting close to it. And then I just come around the bend and there's some more police activity. A police van and a police car, an ambulance, and some tape here, just across the bridge here. So I just pull in where I'm pulling in now, actually. I walked up the drive. It's a short walk up a gravel drive into the cottage. The kitchen door is on the side of the cottage. I just looked in, I could see, sadly, Georgina was lying there face down with a large amount of blood around her, some stab wounds to her neck. So I was satisfied at that point that we did have something that was a suspicious death.
A murder investigation is launched, and police maintain a secure perimeter in and around Georgina's home.
You only get one go at recovering evidence from a body, and one that is already compromised. There will be a lot of discussion about what should be sampled at the scene, what should be done at the scene, what is going to be compromised by another action. So there will be a lot of effort going into preserving as much evidence as possible.
I actually want this road completely closed. And it's one entrance in, one entrance out, but I didn't want anyone else coming across in. I certainly didn't want the press turning up and having a look. And so immediately what we call a wider cordon was put on, and we blocked the road so that we had complete control of the area.
That morning, we went out for a walk, and as we crossed the road where it leads to her house, there was a policeman standing there. There was a car, the road was blocked. And I said, "Can you tell me what's happening on this road? There's been a murder."
When the news broke, it was fairly obvious from the beginning that this was going to be a big story. Neighbours would phone the newsroom and say, "Can you tell us anything about what's going on?"
Everybody was talking about it, wherever you went, everybody in all the shops. And there were police everywhere, and you just wouldn't generally see police presence in that area.
The 15 years that we've been here, we haven't seen or we haven't heard of a murder, except for this one. This is the first one.
I think that was quite worrying, because, why? Why was this little old lady killed? What was the reason? So it just seemed very, very random and horrible.
It became very obvious very quickly that this was a murder hunt that was out of the ordinary, shall we say.
So what led to a murder in this peaceful village? And why would someone want to kill a well-loved member of the community?
Police emergency.
This is an emergency. I've just walked into the kitchen and found my mother's body lying there. This looks like a crime scene to me. This is a murder.
In the picturesque village of Brambridge, the close-knit community has woken up to the news that a much-loved 77-year-old grandmother, Georgina Edmonds, has been brutally murdered in her home.
It's extremely grim. My mum was 77 at the time and living with us, not very far away. So, yeah, you don't even want to think about it.
It's gone from being a quiet village scenario to then being sort of on the local news, everybody talking about it, what's happened, that type of thing doesn't happen around here.
With a small community in fear of a killer in their midst, it's down to DCI Paul Barton to address the public.
A Saturday morning I was doing my first media briefing, and it was packed, and it was Sky News Live, BBC Live. It was headline news, it was Midsummer Murders, kind of 77-year-old lady murdered brutally. So the nation were interested and the media were interested.
Under a national media spotlight, Hampshire police are under pressure to work out who would kill Georgina Edmonds and why.
I just start sort of kicking into autopilot. The next thing I'm thinking is, well, who's done this? Who's responsible? Any suspicious incident calls in that area in the last 24 hours? Has the victim been a victim of any other crimes? Is there any sort of domestic violence within the household? What do we know about the rest of the family? What do we know about the neighbours?
Was this a stranger murder? Was this someone, though, that she knew? And in such a small village, how did they get in and out of the cottage without being seen?
With a killer on the loose, the finger of suspicion is on every member of the community.
Everybody asking questions. We had so many people come in the pub at the time. You know, did you hear anything? Did you see anything? Do you know who it was? You know.
We go out as the media and knock on doors and try to talk to people and find people that would have known her. When you've only got 5 homes to actually knock on the door, the community, they'll be in shock themselves, actually, about it.
With Georgina's son, Harry, too distraught to speak, it was left to neighbours to speculate what had happened. Had someone targeted her because of her wealth?
They had a beautiful house, they had quite a bit of money in the family. I just remember that, you know, the money, the big house, the jewellery. It was in a dark, secluded area.
There was nothing else there. There was another house, I think, to the right, I seem to remember. But that's it. She was on her own.
Police conduct a thorough search of Georgina's house for clues.
We were exploring what could have happened. Was it burglary that was the motive? Her credit card had been taken. I believe also a Radley handbag was gone. I think a laptop was gone. But there were other items that were there in the kitchen that were quite valuable. There was monies out, I believe, that were just left. And that seemed rather strange, that this was a burglary that had gone wrong, that the burglar hadn't taken those fairly obvious items that were there.
Police take a closer look at the crime scene, and one significant thing jumps out. There's no sign of a forced entry.
Was this a cover-up? Was it another motive? And so, therefore, had she been targeted in some other way, and it was a pretend burglary, taking just a few things, when a real burglar would have taken lots of things.
With no sign of a break-in, everyone known to Georgina is under suspicion. Could the local community offer clues as to who Georgina may have let into the house?
Trusting. You couldn't have had anyone more trusting. She was that sort of person. She never disputed things, you know, she just trusted people. And sometimes people are a bit suspicious, but she wasn't that type of person.
She was the sort of person, and I guess this is of her age, that would keep her door unlocked. You know, she would talk to strangers. If someone knocked on the door and asked for directions, she wouldn't be suspicious. Probably even offer them a cup of tea and, you know, spend time with people.
With no obvious break-in, detectives are left to speculate whether this was a random attack by a stranger or by someone closer to home.
Quite often, the last person to see the person alive could be the killer. It is odd that a son comes home and finds their mum dead in a kitchen. I've dealt with other jobs where children have killed parents. You know, they may have been off their face on drink or drugs. There may have been a domestic argument that's then gone too far. He could have had an axe to grind with his mother, and he could have killed his mother, and then he's just made up that he's come in and found her dead.
Police reanalyse the 999 call made by Georgina's son, Harry.
I've just walked in and found my mother's body lying there. This looks like a crime scene to me. This is a murder.
It's a strange call, I have to say. He's very calm, but he says she's dead. I think it's a murder, he says. And I remember, you know, we played that time and time again, and it's gone out in the media as well. And, you know, a lot of people thought that was strange.
Police bring Harry in for questioning to establish his movements in the hours his mother was murdered. He tells detectives he was at work all day and did not return home till 6 p.m.
He was concerned because he hadn't heard from his mother all day, and I think he'd been trying to call her. And he went to the cottage and it was in darkness. Harry's managed to force open the ground floor window, I think into Georgina's bedroom. He climbs in, goes into the kitchen and finds Georgina lifeless on the floor in a pool of blood.
Harry's story is quickly verified. Police are still no closer to establishing who had gained access to Georgina's home. So they release CCTV footage of Georgina, the day before her death, which shows her holding a handbag, which is now missing, and urged the public for help.
To be honest, most people were pretty appalled anyway, just the fact that an old lady had been murdered without knowing the detail. And generally, everyone was trying to be as helpful as they possibly could.
Well, it was a huge community thing, and they had big things in the village hall. So everyone got together, they all went out searching. Everybody was sort of part of it. Everybody searched, everyone went and looked, and yeah, all together really as a community.
Despite the community's best efforts, Georgina's handbag isn't found. But post-mortem results help police identify the cause of death. Could this lead to clues as to her attacker?
On one level, the death of Georgina Edmonds pathologically is straightforward. She has been struck on the head with a heavy blunt object. Ultimately, it was identified that that was a marble rolling pin. A heavy weapon, a good sort of thing to use to cause damage. But on top of that, you then have the incised wounds, the cuts to the body, inflicted with a degree of deliberation, and you don't really have defensive type injuries. One conclusion that could reasonably be drawn is that if they're not in a place where they are likely to kill you, that they are an act of torture. There is an attempt to distress somebody and extract information.
Police now believe Georgina was tortured before she died.
It was horrific.
Terrible.
And as more details came out about what the guy had done to her, apparently tortured her, I mean, it got worse and worse.
Eventually, it emerged just the horrible scale of the injuries to Georgina that were allied to trying to find out her PIN number for her credit card.
We established about 5 hours after discovering her body that somebody had attempted to use that cash point card at a local ATM, and we feel that they were trying to get the PIN number out of Georgina.
Police trace CCTV from that local Tesco ATM in nearby Eastleigh, only half a mile away from the murder scene, and see someone attempting to take money out.
They attempted to use the machine a couple of times. I think it swallowed up the card and off it went. So we didn't have a facial image of the person using the ATM machine, but we were confident to say it was a man. And in particular, the user of the ATM machine was wearing a thick fluorescent jacket with a hood up. And the person that approached that clearly knew that that camera was there because they took all reasonable steps to avoid being seen, keeping their head down, keeping the hood up, etc.
Despite his face being hidden, detectives now have an image of Georgina's killer, and the search for this person intensifies.
This is probably someone who was local or had local connections with Eastleigh. Have we had any offenders that have been released from prison recently in that area on licence? Have we got any registered sex offenders or violent offenders that are in that area? Luckily for me, the duty detective sergeant happened to know that there was a bail hostel called Elderfield House, which was pretty much at the end of the road from Brambridge leading into Otterbourne Village. It's the sort of place that you wouldn't expect to find in an affluent village like Otterbourne or Brambridge, and there are some unpleasant people there.
Behind those trees is Elderfield.
You can just see the rooftop over there.
These are people that had done time in prison, and after their term was over, they've sent them here.
It's a halfway house, basically.
It's a halfway house.
It was somewhere where they could sort of spend time and sort of rehabilitate and get back into normal life. And they would hang around in groups and get very drunk. And it was not nice. It was quite a bit unsettling.
It is of some concern in that you don't know what's going to happen next.
You would often get some of them escape, or they would then get out and they aren't supposed to be out. Danger, I guess it was described as.
Police question the residents of Elderfield to establish their movements on the night of Georgina's murder.
There were 4 people that were unaccounted for that night. I think 3 had come back late, within 24 hours or so, we declared 4 people as suspects from Elderfield House. And we arrested them, searched their rooms, brought them back to the police station, forensically examined them, and then put them through the interview process.
After hours of questioning, it soon becomes clear to detectives that 3 of the suspects had clear alibis and are released without charge. But the 4th did not return to Elderfield for 24 hours during the night Georgina was murdered. And his clothing is of particular interest to police.
The CCTV showed this fluorescent jacket, which was really key. And in our search in Elderfield House, we established that one of the residents who was unaccounted for on the night was wearing a big fluorescent jacket. He had previous convictions for murder or manslaughter. And so he was of particular interest and excitement to the team at that time.
But police are able to verify the 4th man's alibi, and he is released without charge. And with no suspect or clear motive, fear begins to escalate across the local community.
It's unsettling. It's unknown because the police don't tell you exactly what's happening, especially when they say, well, we haven't found him yet, we're still looking out for him, So where is he?
It was quite scary. My family were saying to me, don't go out on your own at night, don't go out to the car park on your own. It definitely makes you change the way you behave, the way you think. For ages, people didn't go to the garden centre. That was really affected by the whole situation, because I just think people thought it was a dangerous area to go to, so they didn't go there.
They were getting more and more concerned and worried that this is someone still here then, is it? Are we to believe that this is a stranger of someone that was passing through, just happened to pick the cottage, just happened to find that the door was open, going there, carry out this terrible crime, and then just drive away and leave the area utterly and completely, and that's it? Or is it more likely that the perpetrator is still here amongst us?
It's been 1 month since much-loved grandma, Georgina Edmonds, was found murdered in her home in Brambridge, and police are yet to charge anyone for the heinous crime.
It was in the media daily, any newspaper stack you saw it. It was on the news, it was on the radio. We had boards up everywhere, and if you lived in the area as well, you couldn't miss it. Everyone knew what was going on.
I think at the time there was an urgency to get this one done, to get it sorted.
The only sighting detectives have is by a Tesco ATM machine in nearby Eastleigh. And so the investigation to find this man spotted on CCTV escalates.
We knew that Georgina's card had been attempted to be used. Then obviously that, for me, becomes an area of concentration for house to house. So we had police patrols in the area, certainly at the Tesco Express. We wanted to capture anyone that was there at the material time. So we obviously pulled the CCTV from the petrol station itself. We could read all the registration numbers of the cars coming in. And then we had the obvious houses sort of adjacent to Tesco Express and then right opposite. And so I decided that we would focus house to house in that area as well, knocking on doors. Again, good old-fashioned detective work.
And it isn't long before one address catches police attention.
There was a raid on a house that wasn't far from where the cash point had been, where the person in the frame had been using the debit card.
There was a particular address not a million miles away from the ATM machine where a man lived up until the point of around about the 11th of January and then disappeared. The inquiries that we did identified that he was Polish and had gone back to Poland. And he may have also had some previous convictions, so I sent a team out to Poland.
Suddenly, the news story goes international.
We had reports that the police had actually gone out to Poland to carry out inquiries.
There was a lot of media interest in this particular case, and then the media were descending on us, and they would put two and two together and come up with murderer fled to Poland and all this. You know, got the community kind of excited, if you like, because they were thinking, oh, great, they finally caught that person.
Police questioned the Polish man regarding his movements on the night Georgina was murdered. Have they finally found their killer?
He was alibied, and also, I think, through DNA as well, we were able to eliminate him from the inquiry.
With the Polish man in the clear, Hampshire police are back in the UK and back to square one. So they release a clearer version of the CCTV footage to the public and suspect the person is a male aged between 16 and 60 with an estimated height of 5'11". The hunt for this man accelerates to new levels.
We wanted DNA swabs from males matching that description to come forward. Our view was, if you've got nothing to hide, come forward.
You can't force people to do that kind of thing. But what this did, of course, was to add to the suspicion in the community. But they would have come forward because feeling, well, if I don't, then suspicion's going to fall on me. I must admit that, in my experience, I've never come across a mass DNA appeal anywhere that I've worked before. It was certainly turning into something that's, well, a modern-day thriller.
More than 2,000 local men have their DNA swabbed, but there are no immediate results, and the case goes cold. Two and a half years later, and Georgina's killer is still at large. But on the 30th of June, 2010, things take a dramatic turn. An arrest is made. And it's a local man. 31-year-old Matthew Hamlin.
We scramble to find out who this man is. He's got a history of violence, and you know he's not a nice guy to know.
Matthew Hamlin was known to police. He'd been known for drug usage and also violence in the past. He had a off-on relationship with a local girl. In fact, he'd had an argument with her and resulted hitting her with an ironing board, and she moved out of the home. He had quite a bad drug habit at that time, using cocaine, and we understand he also racked up numerous debts as a result of his drug usage. And so that kind of fitted the profile of somebody high on drugs, desperate, and probably not really thinking what they're doing.
You can understand that the police would be interested in him. He used to walk his dog along the riverbank there and would know the area quite well. So he fitted in one of the profiles, shall we say, for the police.
But what exactly led to Matthew's arrest?
One particularly interesting subject came to them with a couple of bits of evidence. The first was that despite he denying that he had been in the area on that particular day and time, his phone records were showing that he actually was there.
This person had a mobile phone, and what we could show was that their phone was bouncing off the same cell mast on the afternoon of the 11th of January.
With Hamlin in custody, police waste no time in recording his every word when his mum visits.
The other thing is I might have an alibi for it as well.
What do you mean?
When they first interviewed me, I ain't got a clue where I was. And Sarah got out her diary and she flipped through, looked at the date, and she said, yeah, you was with me.
I can speak to Sarah.
Yeah. See if she's still going to make that.
I think she was trying to be helpful for him. And I guess, you know, if you think about it, you don't want to think your child is responsible for doing such a grave crime. And so I would imagine she was desperate.
But I haven't spoken to them for ages. I haven't fallen out of them, but I ain't spoken to them. So whether she's still going to say that or not, but I can't remember it. I was off my head all the time. I was drunk. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know where I was 2.5 years ago. I struggled where I was last week.
It was quite clear in that recording that he was trying to manufacture an alibi at that time that would take him out of the area at the material time when Georgina was murdered.
As well as Hamlin's mobile phone pinging on a nearby mast, linking him to the scene, new evidence comes to light, which police believe is even more conclusive.
The other bit was partial DNA that was found on the rolling pin, and also, I believe, on a small part of her clothing. That was a partial match to this particular subject. Putting the two together, and he came right to the top.
Eventually, the scientists were able to show some components of that mixed profile were 2,600 times more likely to be attributable to Matthew Hamlin. We were fairly confident that Hamlin was responsible.
After a manhunt that lasted years, it seems police have finally found their man. And Matthew Hamlin is charged with Georgina's murder. Matthew pleads not guilty, and 10 months later, the trial begins at Winchester Crown Court.
You're nervous, you're excited, you've got the victim's family up in the gallery, your QC opens up the case, you hear what's being said, and you sit back and think, that sounds pretty good. You know, if I'm on the jury, I'd be thinking, guilty.
The prosecution lay out a mountain of evidence against Matthew Hamlin. And after a 3-month trial, the jury returns with its verdict.
When the call came through, I remember the news desk saying to me, it's not guilty. At that moment, it was one of those moments in the newsroom where you get that stunned silence.
They don't happen that often. So when they do, and when it's such an important case like that, you can't really describe it. It's just a punch in the guts, you know. Yes, professionally, you're disappointed for yourself, you know, and your team, but it's the family, you know, you really feel for. And you know, you do question, could we have done more, you know? Did we have the wrong person, you know? Is there somebody out there that's done this that we haven't caught?
And you think about the community. The community had lived with this for 4 years. They believed that the monster amongst them had been caught and was now going to get his just desserts. And now it wasn't. And according to the court, he's not the monster at all. Well, who is the monster?
Despite a 2.5-year manhunt and becoming Hampshire Constabulary's most expansive investigation, Matthew Hamlin has been acquitted of Georgina Edmonds' murder, leaving her family, the community and the police feeling devastated and in shock.
Well, we're back now to square one. The mystery continues. The courts have cleared him. So who is it? Is it my neighbour? Is it my friend? Is it someone in my family? Is it someone I work with?
You always have to be open-minded, and you have to accept that actually Hamlin didn't do it, and there is someone else out there.
With the case unsolved, the possibility of the killer getting away with murder looms over police.
Are the police looking for anyone else? Is the case closed? And the police were quite adamant that the case remained open, that they were carrying on their investigations.
So obviously we have a debrief. We'll meet with counsel as well. We'll speak with the family. We will conduct a review of that investigation to see if there were anything we missed, anything we could have done, mainly because so lessons can be learned, because once somebody's been acquitted, that's it.
Detectives go back to the drawing board and relook at all the evidence they have collated over the years and examine what went wrong.
We spent millions of pounds on this investigation, the most expensive investigations that Hampshire police have ever run, and the forensic budget was through the roof.
Beforehand, they had looked for his DNA on the marble rolling pin, but graphically, there was so much of Georgina Edmonds' blood on that blurred everything, and they got just a partial sample. And then from another small part of her clothing, where again, it was a partial sample. I mean, you're asking a jury to put someone away for life on the grounds of circumstantial evidence and also partial DNA. It's too cloudy, and I think juries can then look at it and say, can I actually send a man away for life on evidence here which is not the strongest?
Police spend years looking for new techniques to forensically identify a killer. And they eventually come across a recent form of DNA testing called YSTR, which extracts the male DNA profile from a full DNA profile.
It's a simple process, and it's almost sellotape on clothing and points of the body to remove skin cells. So it's fairly early on in the exhibits that we've taken of the left sleeve of Georgina's blouse, which would have had skin cells on there. And so the decision was taken to look at those skin cells and examine them, because we hadn't done so far. We'd done the waistband, but not the sleeve. And then obviously it went for analysis, number crunching, etc. And it came back with a full male profile.
On Thursday, 30th of October 2014, police make an announcement. They have arrested and charged a suspect for the murder of Georgina Edmonds. As a new trial looms, people want to know, who is in the frame? None other than Matthew Hamlin.
This is incredible. They're going to put him back on trial. It wouldn't have been allowed because double jeopardy meant you could not be tried for the same crime in this country that had only been changed a few years prior to that, which enabled this to actually happen.
Despite the double jeopardy rules changing in 2003 and a new stack of DNA evidence, how did detectives manage to get Hamlin's charge over the line?
It's not an easy thing to do for obvious reasons. The defence argued that it's not new evidence, you had it all along, you just chose not to examine it and find it. But actually, it's not evidence until you've actually turned it into evidence. And that was the ruling of Sir Brian Leveson, who heard that at the Court of Appeal, who then quashed the acquittal, and we were able to then go for a retrial.
January 2016, exactly 8 years after Georgina's murder, the second trial of Matthew Hamlin begins at Winchester Crown Court. The prosecution lay out all their evidence once again, including their new secret weapon, the YSTR DNA technique.
We were hoping for a better outcome this time.
It's 1 in 26 million, that DNA, that it's not him.
And when you describe that, you know, there's 26 million to 1 is this person, I think it was a fairly easy decision for the jury to make. Layered on top of that was, obviously, he was a local person, violent background, and obviously the phone was bouncing off the mast at the time.
Despite presenting their new evidence in court, there are many in the community who are unconvinced that Matthew Hamlin is the killer. At the time of the second trial, Matthew is a changed man, leaving behind his days of drug taking, working full-time as an electrician and raising his family. And after a grueling 6-week trial, the jury retires to consider the verdict.
When you do get to court and the prosecution and the defence have had their say and the judge has summed up, you still get a bit nervous, even though you just know in your heart of hearts that it's a really, really strong case.
So we can't speculate, we can't talk to people about, well, you know, what do you think this time? Do you think he's going to get off a second time?
On the 23rd of February 2016, the jury return with a verdict.
8 years after Georgina Edmonds, aged 77 years, was found dead at her home in Banbridge, Matthew Hamlin has today been found guilty of her brutal murder.
It was just a sense of relief and just great work, and so many people, bear in mind this investigation had gone on for years really, and so many people have got involved in that investigation. But it was just such a nice feeling.
Throughout this entire investigation, we have been absolutely determined to prove beyond reasonable doubt who committed this horrific crime. After the discovery of new evidence and presenting it to the Court of Appeal, we were able to try Matthew Hamlin again for the murder of Georgina Edmonds. The whole prosecution team were determined to find justice for Georgina, and today that has been achieved.
Being stood there, listening to Harry address the media and just say some really nice words about me and my colleagues and Hampshire Police and all the work that we had done to get justice for the family. So yeah, just a great feeling.
The entire team of police officers, police staff, prosecution barristers, forensic scientists and colleagues from the Crown Prosecution Service have been absolutely dedicated to putting together the best possible case that could be put before the court and the jury. Every moment has been worth it to see justice finally served and the killer of Georgina Edmonds behind bars. Thank you.
With Matthew Hamlin finally behind bars, the question that still puzzles the community is why would he want to end the life of Georgina Edmonds so brutally, torturing her before battering her to death?
Who can say, and it's difficult for me to speculate. Well, we know now from the court case, although he's never admitted it, that he was short of money, that he had walked along the riverbank and he had found his way in the cottage, whether that was just by pure chance, whether he had seen her walking her dogs and had known that she was gone there and she was a vulnerable old lady. Sadly, whether he would have known or not that the door was left open when he went in. He had tortured her to reveal the number for her debit card by stabbing her something like 27 times and then just leave her there, tie her up or something like that. But then it all got, who knows what it is. But I think what we can tell is that he is a pretty evil, nasty guy who will spend 30 years in prison.
And after 8 long years of fear, can normal life return for the local community?
It's so close to reality for us here that, you know, it's traumatic for all of us in the village.
They're vulnerable too. They're so trusting. I know we all felt very, very sorry for her. Yeah, very sorry.
It's Ethan Hunt's toughest choice yet. What's more important, his job or those he cares about most? With out-of-this-world stunts, the BAFTA-nominated Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning is available now on Sky Cinema.
On Sunday, she didn't answer us, and neither on Monday.
The only communication that they had seemingly from her was by text message.
When details started to appear of what had actually happened, it causes a lot of concern, a lot of fear as well.
You could surmise that she'd been strangled or that the cord had actually caused her death.
A lot of the neighbours would have been shocked, but also extremely puzzled as to how this could have happened.
We were suspicious about the lies. It's big lies, you know?
I live every day with the fact that I was friends with the murderer.
At the edge of London lies the village-like suburb of Kew.
Kew is one of the most sought-after areas of London. It's in West London.
Kew is an extremely wealthy area. It's within commuting distance of the City of London, and it's wonderful nature beside the river and the Royal Botanic Gardens.
It's very leafy. It's a very well-to-do kind of area. It's fairly low crime as well. So it's a nice area for people to live in.
There is definitely a villagey feel. We have a very small high street. You will find a lot of independent trades around Kew, which I think that's what people like.
There's a lot of artists and TV celebrities, and of course Sir David Attenborough lives there. It's a world-class site.
Kew was the perfect place for aspiring French filmmaker Laureline Garcia-Bateau to set up home in 2009.
Laureline was my best friend, my close friend. She was like a sister to me. We always be united. We always be in touch. We just developed a friendship, more than a friendship. Our children called her Auntie Lolo, and my daughter has her name. She was family.
She was a vivacious, very popular, well-liked young woman who was beautiful on the inside as well as on the outside. She was easy to like and was a very caring and considerate kind of person.
The future seemed bright for Laureline, and London was the place to help make her career ambitions come true.
She was born in Aix-en-Provence, but she came to London to pursue her dream of becoming a film producer.
Laureline had a lot of passion, but she developed a real passion for cinema. She was a passionate people. She was a determined people. She was a hard worker. She started her own production company. She got a Grammy as a production assistant on a movie with Dame Joan Collins. For us, it was nice and amazing, but I know for England was a dream, and it was a dream.
Despite a successful career, Laureline was happiest at home with her dogs.
Laureline was a dog lover. She loves animals. She had an Instagram of a video every day with her two dogs, Haley, a husky, and Blake, a Rottweiler. Okay, so nice. They sleep on the bed, and we see that on Instagram every day. It's like they're her children for her.
And on top of her busy life in the UK, Laureline stayed in regular contact with her family in France.
Laureline was very close to her family. Oh yes, she used to call her mom every day, and maybe twice a day, on the morning and the evening. So the family for Laureline is everything. Family and friends and pets was everything.
In March 2019, Laureline was due to move out of her flat in Kew into a new place. Something friends and family were eagerly waiting to hear about.
On Sunday, she didn't answer us, neither on Monday, and it was already strange.
Certainly raised alarm bells the fact that Laureline had not spoken to her best friends and her mum and her family when she would normally speak to her mum every day and speak to her best friend very regularly as well. So the only communication that they had seemingly from her was by text message.
But there was something unusual about Laureline's texts.
Her friends had received some strange text messages from her that didn't really chime with the kind of person that they knew her to be. For example, her best friend said that she thought it was strange that she said that she was going on a shopping spree in Oxford Street because she knew that she usually shopped online and got all her clothes from online retailers. She'd described how she was looking forward to getting a boob job and liposuction. Certainly not the kind of thing that she would have said. So this kind of thing immediately raised alarms, and they were very, very concerned that she just seemed to be communicating by text message, but nobody had seen her.
Confused by Laureline's strange behaviour, her sister-in-law makes her way to the property in Kew.
And when she couldn't find her, she alerted the police.
Laureline was reported missing on the 6th of March 2019, and that means that a police officer would be dispatched to talk to her about her concerns and take a report. The missing persons inquiry started with questions to her sister-in-law and potentially any friends that could be found to say, have you seen her? Can you tell us when you last saw her? And the concern was raised because her sister-in-law had visited the address and she could hear dogs barking, Laureline's dogs, and no sign of Laureline. Laureline was a lover of dogs, so she would never leave her dogs alone. They were her children, essentially, at the time. And also, because it was now Tuesday, Laureline had failed to turn up for work, so work colleagues were now concerned. So you had a lot of people voicing their concern about where Laureline was, and that made it a concern for the police because this was completely out of character and completely unusual behaviour.
Police begin their inquiries by also visiting Laureline's address.
In a missing persons inquiry, police will attend an address, the place where a person lives, because within that premises you might find something to indicate where they've gone. It might be a ticket, it might be a receipt, it could be anything. And also you want to make sure that they haven't come to harm behind locked doors. So there would be a natural instinct for officers to get into that premises, and quite often that's by breaking in to check on the welfare of somebody, and that's what they did in this case. The officers went in, searched the premises, and she was not anywhere. But what officers could see inside that address was the boxes all still ready to be packed.
It looked as if she was just about to move out. Her belongings were all boxed up, ready as if she was about to move out of the flat straight away. So it looked like the home had been disrupted in some way.
Back at the police station, officers assess the risk of Laureline's disappearance.
A missing person is graded low, medium, or high risk, and different things happen at different levels. In the low risk, you've got people who perhaps there's no particular harm that you can think, they might just have gone away, and the concern is quite a low for them. Medium risk, slightly more work is done around that because people are concerned, but it might be within their character to go away for a weekend or something like that. So it's not necessarily out of character. Whereas you have the high risk category, and that's where Laureline sat, because this was completely out of character.
After reviewing the case as high risk, police returned to Laureline's address for a more detailed search.
They went out into the garden using torches. And in the garden, they had a look around and they could see various items leaning up against a fence, so a spade, shovel, other items that you would use in general gardening, and a bag of compost as well on the right-hand fence. And one of the officers then turned attention to the flower bed on the left-hand side as you walked into the garden and noticed that it was completely brand new in one section. The CID officer moved the soil back closest to them and identified what they thought was the shape of a foot sticking out in essentially a shallow grave. And just a few more scrapes to see what was there made them believe that what they had found was indeed a body.
Police searching for missing French filmmaker Laureline Garcia-Bateau have discovered a body buried in her back garden.
As soon as you find a body in a shallow grave in a premises, it becomes a murder inquiry straight away, because that person doesn't put themselves there. And that's when the process of the team start to make their own inquiries, and all the different actions that come out of that initial deployment begin in earnest.
With a murder investigation in progress, police secure the scene.
We had a lot of this area all cordoned off, a lot of crime scene tents here, because as you bring items out of the garden as well, you need to put them somewhere which is forensically sterile. And so we try to utilise the area out the back of the premises for that reason. So here really behind the house, the alleyway that we used, and trying to set up a forensic retrieval here was quite difficult because the wind was so strong that it was hard. And obviously knowing how detailed you've got to be and how to avoid any contamination because it is windy, and also you're dealing with an outside scene, it's particularly more complex than you would expect an inner scene to be.
Arrive on scene, having been called by the homicide assessment team, usually, and we'll receive a briefing from the local borough police about what the incident involves and why it may be suspicious. Once we've had a briefing, we'll be wearing protective clothing, mask, overshoes, gloves, scene suit, and entering the scene to look for to see what has occurred.
The crime scene manager is in charge of that scene forensically, whether they be physical exhibits that are taken out of a premises or whether they are swabs or fingerprints. They're in charge of running that scene.
The recovery of the body is totally down to the archaeologist, and he'll work in tandem with an anthropologist. Their speciality is bone analysis, who died, how they died and where they died. Working together, they can rapidly maximise the recording, interpretation and recovery of the body.
As the team removes several inches of soil, it becomes clear that the individual is in fact female.
Obviously, your first thought is, well, Laureline Garcia Bartu is missing, and we have a body in the garden, and it's suspicious that she's missing. So, obviously, my thought is straight away, well, this is probably going to be Laureline. But you don't go to a family with probablys. You have to be sure.
As forensic archaeologists continue digging, the level of brutality on the victim becomes clear.
Once the body was removed from the ground, she was lying on her back, naked. She was wrapped in a mattress, and there was silver duct tape around the area of where the knees and the neck were. The mattress was then wrapped in a cord around the middle of it, but around her neck she had an electric wire. She had a head bag on, and her arms were tied behind her back with duct tape. You could surmise that she'd been strangled, or that the cord had actually caused her death. You couldn't see the rest of the body to determine what else was there. She may have been stabbed, for all we knew, but that wouldn't be able to be looked at until we got to the mortuary.
As the body is taken to the mortuary to establish a cause of death and identify the victim, news of a murder spreads.
For a young woman's body to be dug up in a garden in Kew, it would have been, almost unheard of in a neighbourhood like that. A lot of the neighbours would have been shocked, but also extremely puzzled as to how this could have happened.
I haven't ever heard of a murder in Kew.
It's quite shocking to hear a murder in Kew. It's not normally the norms of anything.
When details started to appear of what had happened, people become very concerned about, something that's happening in your neighbourhood. It causes a lot of concern, a lot of fear as well.
At the mortuary, the post-mortem gets underway.
Once the body arrives for the post-mortem, he would look at both sides of the body for any bruising, any wounds, anything that stands out to him. There was no obvious bruising around the neck. But once you get the body opened up and get under the skin, then the bruising can be seen. Be checking the hyoid bone, the bone under the neck, see if it's fractured, and then it results in the conclusion that death had been compression of the neck, believed via strangulation.
With a cause of death established, it isn't long before the individual is identified as none other than Laureline Garcia-Berteau.
I was in my car alone, and I just remember that it was Laureline's mother I had on phone. So I just say the word, is it her? Is she dead? And I hung up. I remember I screamed. I never screamed like that. It's taken a part of me. She was like my little sister, you know? It's taken a part of me.
The investigation into Laureline's murder ramps up and initial theories are considered. Could this be a burglary gone wrong?
It's a very attractive area for a burglar because there's a lot of assets there.
So if someone's forced their way into the address and killed somebody, and then that person has disappeared, we need to identify them as soon as we can. So we'll be looking to make a light source examination, any finger marks that not seen to the naked eye. Fingerprint examination. We'll be looking for any DNA that we can find, possibly cigarette ends. Things have been moved by the suspect. He may have opened drawers, cupboards, so we'll be looking to examine those DNA. He may have cut himself somewhere, so he may have drops of blood that is left behind.
But a closer examination begins to cast doubts on a suspected burglary.
If it had been a burglary gone wrong, you wouldn't expect them to hang around and attempt to hide the body in the way that it had been.
Police take into consideration Laureline's plans to move home around the time of her murder.
Could the movers have been involved? Could it have been a handyman that had, come round and helped box up her belongings?
After making their inquiries, police discovered that no removal firm had attended the address. So focus switches to Laureline's personal life.
Certainly from her communication with her friends, it was suggested that when she'd last spoken to her sister-in-law, she was looking forward to going on a date with a vet that she'd met. But it was very unclear whether that date had actually taken place or who he was, even. There was very little information given. Who had she been talking to online, on dating apps? Maybe she met somebody else. That was certainly something that could be unravelled through looking into her mobile phone and computer.
Police decide to try to look into Laureline's last movements to see if they hold any clues.
You look at things like Laureline's finance, so where has she spent money, which indicates that she might have been to a certain place, like a restaurant, which we found out on Friday the 1st, she'd been to a restaurant, and then that venue itself has CCTV.
The CCTV shows Laureline dining with a man, with the pair holding hands. And inquiries with those closest to Laureline soon identifies him.
Laureline was in an on-off relationship for quite a number of years with a man called Kerr Belarusov. And this relationship had been going on for 8+ years, but had kind of fizzled out a couple of years beforehand, but they still saw each other on and off. And so they were aware that Kerr was in the UK as an Estonian national, in the UK to come and help her move that weekend.
Police continue to scour CCTV around the area. Both are later seen on bus CCTV, heading in the direction towards Laureline's home in Kew. It seems Kirill may have been one of the last people to see Laureline alive. But when police try to locate him, they find they are too late.
They had discovered that Kirill was actually no longer in the UK. He had flown to Tallinn in Estonia.
Belarusov has left the country.
Police investigating the murder of Laureline Garcia Berteau want to speak to her ex-lover, Kirill Belarusov, as he may have been one of the last people to see her. But police discover that he has left the country.
The CID officers got in contact with Kirill Belarusov via a telephone number they had for him, which was given to them by the family. And they made contact straight away. He behaved like he didn't know what had happened, and the last time he saw her, she was alive.
Kirill tells police he was helping Laureline move on the Saturday, before she left Kew to move to a new address. But when asked further about this last encounter with Laureline, he doesn't give clear answers.
He was being obstructive, in our opinion. He kept avoiding the question. I wanted him back in the country because I wanted to speak to him face to face, but he kept making excuses why he wasn't coming back, or saying, yes, I'm just going to sort it out, and then nothing would happen. He could do everything he could to come back. He was saying he'd be back on one day, that day would go past, we'd ring him and he'd say, I couldn't make it, I'm going to do another day, and this just kept pushing back and pushing back. And you get to a point where you think, well, that's enough. I know he's trying to avoid him coming back.
I think the fact that Belarusov is not keen to help the police in their inquiries, considering that Laureline had been his partner for the best part of 10 years, is extremely suspicious. And the fact that he left the country around the time of her disappearance as well would have raised alarm bells.
Kirill Belarusov soon became the #1 suspect in the inquiry.
But with Kirill refusing to come back, police need to apply for an extradition order.
The police have a fairly complicated process to get someone back from another country. The British police can apply for a European arrest warrant, which is what they did. So they applied to get Belarusov back from Estonia, where he was at the time.
But for the Crown Prosecution Service to agree, the police need to prove they have enough of a case against Kirill.
When you get a European arrest warrant, as this was, when you bring them back into the country, you have no power to interview them. So you have to do everything without asking them a question, which is very, very difficult because you're not giving, firstly, someone the ability to explain, but also you have to reach that threshold of evidence, which means that as soon as they set foot back in this country, you can charge them straight away with the murder.
With police needing to build a firm case against Kirill, they start to dig into his life.
I met Kirill whilst working in a nightclub. It was called Egg, and we started working together, and that's how we met. Kirill was very charming. He was very nice. He was not, arrogant or trying to tell his side of the story. He was always waiting for you to ask a question before bragging or saying anything. Kirill told me about Laureline when we met. He didn't say her name, but he mentioned that he had an ex-girlfriend that he was really in love with, and that they broke up.
But Sabrina recalls how Kirill later spoke in more detail about his and Laureline's relationship and claims she had cheated on him.
He mentioned that he'd had cancer before and that he couldn't have babies anymore, and that one time his ex fell pregnant and she didn't know that he couldn't have babies, and that's how he found out that she cheated, and that's how the relationship ended. He would always say that it was his fault and that she was very caring and that it was hard on her, the fact that he had cancer. So he wasn't blaming her, but he was saying that's how they ended it.
Sabrina remembers the last time she saw Kirill before he left the UK for his home country of Estonia.
The last time I saw Kirill, he told me before that he was going to die, that his cancer was terminal, and that was the last time I was ever going to see him. He said he sold his house, I'm about to die, let's go dinner. And I went to that restaurant crying. I cried most of the night saying, I'm going to lose my friend.
With police still unable to question Kirill to see if his account of his illness is true, they turn to Laureline's finances to try to establish her whereabouts the weekend of her murder.
Through continued interrogation of finances, we see that on Saturday, round about 10:15 in the morning, that there are transactions in Pets at Home and Sainsbury's, all local to where Laureline lived. So again, officers are there as quickly as possible to identify CCTV opportunities. And there you see Kirill Belarusov with Laureline again. So now we know he's with her in the morning.
At a glance, all appears to be fine. But when police look at Laureline's finances a day later on the Sunday, there appears to be no sign of any purchases. Instead, they look into Kirill's finances.
So we start to look at transactions that Kirill might have made as well. And what you could see on Sunday the 3rd of March was Kirill had left premises and had gone to a local retail park, similar to where Laureline and he had been the day before. He'd been to Sainsbury's, been to Homebase, and been to convenience stores through that morning, and was purchasing items which were highly suspicious. They were the rubble sacks that matched the rubble sacks that were found on Laureline's body. He had purchased an axe, which we never found, and he had purchased soil, or compost as it was. And you could see the CCTV of him, identifying him clearly as the person purchasing those items. And so you could say straight away then that it's very, very clear what he was up to. That was now that Laureline had been killed and he was thinking of ways to dispose of her body.
With Kirill's behaviour raising suspicions, police approached the CPS.
We had to go to the Crown Prosecution Service and prove what we had using all of the information we had: CCTV, finance, witness statements, the crime scene itself, the condition of Laureline's body. And that was something which is very, very difficult, but we were able to prove at that point that we had enough evidence to secure an arrest of Kirill Belarusov. And that gives you the ability to get a European arrest warrant and bring them back. He was brought back on the 20th of March and charged with the murder of Laureline. Kirill Belarusov will go to court the following day, to a magistrate's court, where, because it's murder, they send it to the Crown Court, and then he's due to enter a plea some 8 weeks later. And that plea is not guilty. So we knew at that point we are going to trial with him at some stage in 2019.
And as the case is prepared for trial, potential witnesses are called in by the police and prosecution.
The police called me saying, we want to talk to you about your friend Kirill, and I thought they were calling me to say that he was dead. They told me he's been arrested, he's killed someone. I was in shock. I was like, are you sure that it is the right person? And they said, yes. You don't murder, you don't think that you knew a murderer?
Kirill Belarusov has been charged with the murder of his ex-partner, Laureline Garcia-Berteau. The trial begins at the Old Bailey in London, and the prosecution open their case against Kirill with DNA evidence from the crime scene.
The flex that was used to tie Laureline's hands behind her back, you could see that flex on the floor in the living room where it had been cut. And indeed, the forensic testing showed that Kirill Belarusov's DNA was at the cut part of that flex.
The jury hears of the early relationship between Laureline and Kirill.
At the beginning, she called him my Superman. He's tall, very helpful, especially with women, you know. He came to spend a few days with Laureline at my home. He ate at my parents' table. He was a Superman, a good boy.
And Kirill had even boasted of his career achievements to Laureline.
He had told people he was a stuntman and that he'd worked on films with famous people like Brad Pitt, and that he was training people. We searched in the industries at Hollywood, and we searched in the UK, IMDb, to see where was he in these films, and they're always shown if you work on there. He was nowhere to be found. These were all complete and utter lies that he told everybody.
But the lies did not stop there.
He began to say to lots of people that he was sick and that he had 10 years left to live.
He didn't talk much about his cancer. You would ask him questions and he would say, I'm bleeding from every hole. I've been puking for the last 3 days. I think it's just once where I said, if you don't mind me asking, what is the cancer? Where is it? And he said, oh, it's the pancreas, it's the liver area. And then the time after, he would be like, oh, it's spread everywhere. But he would never give any more details. He'd just say, I'm a guinea pig. They've opened me up and stitched me. They keep on opening me up. But he wasn't very specific.
Laureline's mother, friend, and I found it very strange because he has nothing in front of us. When we saw Kirill, my wedding day, or for a holiday, we can't imagine he's sick.
I've never known someone who had cancer. So when I saw him with a shaved head, I didn't question it. I didn't think he still had eyebrows. And I didn't know that you lose your eyebrows when you have chemo.
We were suspicious about the lies. It's big lies, you know? We were suspicious. We tell that to Laureline. We explained to her to open her eyes, but she was in love.
And we were discovering that almost all of his entire life that he told people about was a complete lie. Saying you've got cancer when you don't have, for me, is the lowest of the low.
The prosecution also reveals to the court more about Kirill's double life.
Every time he suggested he was going in for treatment to a hospital in London or just outside of London, what he was actually doing was going to stay with another girlfriend in London. That girlfriend also was told the same lie by him, that he had cancer. So when he was not with her and saying that he was away for a few days, he was going to stay with Laureline.
It's only when I sat down in court that I realized that he was texting the three of us at the same time, his girlfriend, Laureline, and me. So it was really like juggling between the three of us. With me, he was supposed to be in Russia having treatment, and then he was actually in London seeing Laureline, talking to Laureline. I felt like a fool. I felt so stupid. It was so shocking.
The prosecution described that as Laureline's film career began to take off, Kirill may have looked towards her with envy.
He wanted a career in films as well, to a certain extent. He wanted to be a stuntman, but he wasn't, and he couldn't have been because he didn't have the skills to do that. His only skill was lying, whereas she was genuinely talented, and she was very, very hardworking, and she was prepared to earn her place in her chosen career. So I think there probably was an element of jealousy in the relationship.
But it's details of a debt owed to Laureline which could point towards a motive for murder.
She had given him so much money over the course of their relationship, and we knew you were talking plus £17,000 at least at that point. And that was getting to the point where he had to pay that money back. In November 2018, Laureline had sent a message to Kirill, and this was saying, you don't realise how much in debt, how much in trouble I am. I can't pay my rent. You need to pay me the money back. And from friends and family, we would always hear stories where he would promise this money. It's coming, I've got this job, this stuntman job, whatever it might be, which was all lies. So he knew he could never pay that back. That could be one motive. Secondly, she was at that point in her life now where she was ready to move on, away from him. And she was effectively a source of income for him as well. And that was about to dry up.
To the court's surprise, Kirill gives evidence.
I think the most shocking about the trial was himself. He took the stand and spoke, and it was just, I think it lasted 2 days, and it was 2 days of horror. Every word that was coming out of his mouth was horrible. The way he talked about me, the way he talked about Laureline, the way he saw himself, the arrogance in his voice. I remember sitting down terrified because I had been so close to him and just thinking, that man is a monster. It was traumatizing.
I always think about the people over the years that have been in front of you in a trial, and he's probably right up there as the most evil-looking eyes I think I've ever seen. And because behind it you can see that he really doesn't care. You know, his image and what he's portrayed himself as is more important than anything else. And he was really, really unpleasant and arrogant beyond belief during the entire 4-week trial at the Old Bailey.
The court hears how in March 2019, Laureline begged Kirill one last time to pay back what was owed to her. But instead, he used this opportunity to kill Laureline.
You have the timeline of them going out on the Friday night, which we can see. We have the timeline of them going shopping on Saturday morning. She had booked a removal company ready for Saturday, but she didn't know where she was moving to because Kirill Belarusov had said he has found somewhere for her to move to. She had no money because he owed her a lot of money. She kept asking him, where am I going? And you could see that through telephone contact. Well, where is this address? I need to tell my removal company where we're going. And so the removal company basically said, well, I can't move you to nowhere. So it was all cancelled. Kirill Belarusov comes up with a new lie. He's organised a removal company for her.
But the removal company never came.
And you get to the point then where Laureline is panicking because she doesn't know where she's going, and she's clearly getting to that point in the evening where, on that Saturday, she's starting to disbelieve what he's saying. And that's when everything goes quiet.
It's at this point that Kirill strangled Laureline with a cord. And the following morning, he was seen in local shops purchasing suspicious items.
Kirill had been out and bought these items on the Sunday morning, which were used to cover the body of Laureline.
After returning to Laureline's home to bury her body, Kirill used her phone to send fake texts to Laureline's friends and family to buy some time.
He foolishly used Google Translate to try and reply to the family members in French, and obviously it's not going to sound very credible. It's not going to sound like Laureline, not the words that she would use, and the translation was extremely clunky, so it was immediately quite suspicious.
And at the time that those messages were being sent, he was using the Wi-Fi of the address itself. So that puts him inside the address using her phone. Sickeningly looking at pornography at the same time he's sending these messages, knowing full well that in that house is Laureline's body. And that really shows you what kind of person he is. It's very difficult to comprehend a person who has that kind of personality, that very strange and almost psychotic personality.
By the time concerned family and friends of Laureline get in touch with Kirill about her disappearance, he's leaving the country for Estonia.
I put my phone with video with him. I saw that he was in the airport. So I asked him, you are in the airport and your lovely Lowline is missing. Why are you leaving? He has no explanation, but he leaves.
After a grueling trial at the Old Bailey, the jury returns its verdict. Kirill Belarusov is found guilty of murder and is sentenced to 24 years in prison.
About the verdict, we can't say that we are happy because our friend will never come again. But we are grateful for the jury and the judge to having seen him the real way he is and to not allow him to do that again to another woman.
But even with Loreline's killer behind bars, the impact of his crimes are long-lasting.
Today, we are more mistrusting. Today, when my friend meets a man, I want to know everything. I want to know where she is, the address. It's changed all of our lives.
This entire story definitely had an effect on me. He destroyed so many lives, not just Loreline's. So many people that have been touched by his lies, so many people that believed he was such a nice person. And I think we were all a bit destroyed because we were all fooled and none of us saw anything. And if just one of us saw something, she could still be alive.
When a routine call to a house fire turns into the biggest murder investigation in Welsh history, you know you're in for a chilling ride. New Murder in the Valleys starts Wednesday at 9.
When you hear there's a murder, it can frighten people.
I was so shocked that something like that would happen in a lovely village like this.
They seemed to be happy with each other, everyone loved her, and she got along with everyone.
There were concerns about her welfare. The alarm bells were raised.
They had heard things happening, shouting, fights.
It was weird. It's as if he was trying to tell us something.
He went off on what can only be described as a drink and drugs binge. Ultimately, it led to the tragic death of a lovely, caring wife.
Lovely woman who was taken away from us by a horrible, sadistic man.
Situated in the stunning rolling wolds of North Lincolnshire lies the peaceful village of Werleby.
I've lived in Werleby for 48 years. It's a really nice, quiet village. Everybody seems to know everybody. We get on really well.
Last year, we won the Best Kept Village. It's a nice little village, plenty of activities, plenty going on. It's so quiet, it's a little rural idyll, if you like. It's like going back in time living here. There's very little crime, it's beautiful, and it's a wonderful place to live for young families or retired people, and we've got all of them here.
Friendly community, everybody seemed like pretty much okay, you know.
There's a lot of people who help each other, so there is quite a lot of good community atmosphere.
And it is a lovely place to live. It's really nice.
So it's the ideal place for Ian Hamer and wife Joanne to set up home.
We're fairly new to the village. I think they've only been here about 5 years in total.
I think I met her once. She seemed a really nice lady.
Joanne in particular seems to throw herself into village life.
Joanne was liked by everyone on the road. Outgoing, always out on the streets, speaking to each other. Ian, you would never see. He would be in his home quite a lot. Joanne, complete opposite. Everyone loved her, a really welcoming woman, and she got along with everyone. And so people wanted to open up to her, and that's why I think she quickly integrated into Worthy and loved living there.
Joanne also has a successful career at the local council where she manages their healthy lifestyle service. After 6 years there, she's risen to become the public face of their healthy living campaigns.
She was quite a bright, some would say brilliant person who had a quite substantial job working with the local authority and really independently minded in some respects.
Just a lovely woman who did wonders for the council. Everyone loved her at the council, and no one had a bad word to say about her.
Ian Hamer, Joanne's husband of 27 years, works as a self-employed business consultant.
He worked in many businesses and earning money here and there, and to sustain a reasonable living, you know. He had a nice place in Worlby, quite an expensive area to live in, so he must have been doing okay in his profession, I guess. They seemed to be happy with each other. Friends and family said that there was a good couple for the large part. Married a long time, nice family, 3 kids. It was all seemingly going well.
But what seems like an idyllic life is about to change.
Humberside Police, what's your emergency?
Humberside Police are called after Joanne fails to turn up for work. Her elderly mother has also been trying to reach her, to no avail.
They did speak most days, if not every day, because her mother was very ill as well. And Joanne used to help to look after her. And that raised sufficient concern for her to ring the police.
There were concerns about her welfare. The alarm bells were raised.
And a concern for welfare incident was generated, which resulted in the police attending.
Police make their way over to the family home. When they knock on the door, there's no answer. So the officers break in. When they search through the house, nothing could prepare police for what they find in the master bedroom. Joanne Hamer's lying lifeless on her bed.
Medical professionals will have been called immediately. You know, monitors would have been placed on to see if there's any signs of heart trace or anything. Any chance whatsoever that resuscitation could take place.
They had discovered she was dead. It's apparent she'd been killed from the scene, the way she was left. And there was blood at the scene as well.
Joanne had been strangled by her dressing gown cord.
That's when we're looking at securing evidence within that scene.
Teams of police descend on Worlby. The quiet village has never seen anything like it.
When I came back from work, there was police cars, vans, and I'm saying, what's going on? What on earth's all the police doing here? Something happened, and then when I got home and my daughter texted me and said she'd seen it, that there'd been a murder. I just couldn't believe it. I was so shocked that something like that would happen in a lovely village like this. You don't expect it.
As word spreads fast through the neighbourhood, the local newspaper gets wind of an incident in Worlby. Reporter Charlie Wilson heads to the scene.
So you're like, OK, we've got a big story. Let's get there first. Let's be quick. Let's be first. So we got down there. We were the first people there. Very quickly, it was evident this could be a very serious, scary incident. I've never reported on a murder before. That's the first time that's happened to me. So it was a case of doing it really delicately, respectfully, and just trying to build up what had happened, really.
Soon, the news is spreading beyond the boundaries of the village.
Maybe an hour later, you get the likes of ITV, BBC, Sky coming down, and that's when it was like, whoa, OK. People out on the road, like, wondering what's going on. Yeah, everyone was shocked to see the amount of media attention.
You just don't get this sort of thing in these sort of villages.
Yeah, I was quite shocked, really. You would never think that something would happen in a small community like this. I couldn't believe it.
Everybody was shocked. It didn't seem right. Something like that would happen here. You hear about it in cities, but in a little quiet Lincolnshire village, you just don't expect it at all.
Joanne's family are left devastated by the news, and her colleagues at work are also reeling.
Truly sad. I spoke to a few of them. They were just in pieces, of course they would be. Their colleague who they loved dearly, and they really did love her. It was tough for them, it was very tough.
And it dawns on Joe's village that there's a killer living in their midst.
I think some people were a little bit upset. They were locking the doors a bit more quickly.
I think the first reaction is alarm, because when you hear there's a murder but you don't know the circumstances, and it can frighten people into thinking we've got a killer at large who's going to cause more trouble. You're quite fearful about what it could mean and what the implications for the future are.
It was very awful to hear that it had happened in our village. It's frightening, it really is.
With fear spreading quickly throughout the village, Humberside Police needs to work fast to establish who committed this horrendous crime. And first, they look at Joanne's home life.
This marriage on the surface, to all intents and purposes, would have looked like a stable, normal marriage without too many problems. The reality was quite different.
What I heard was that their marriage wasn't great by the people on the road who lived there, because they had heard things happening, let's just say, whether it be shouting, fights.
It turns out Joanne and Ian had recently had a trial separation, but then Joanne decided to return to the family home.
Joanne Hamer had sought to see if she could give the relationship one last chance. This was part of her trying to make the relationship work.
This new information puts husband Ian in a new light.
Maybe Joanne tried to keep certain things to herself to hide what was really going on at the home to save her marriage.
With Ian Hamer nowhere to be seen, police suspicions are starting to build.
We do know in this particular case that a neighbour had reported an argument in the morning between them.
I spoke to the woman who heard the incident around 4 o'clock in the morning, around that time. She had heard screams, shouts for help.
And then the argument ceased.
Police launch an urgent public appeal to help them find Joanne's husband. They need to track down Ian Hamer, and fast. In the quiet Lincolnshire village of Werleby, police have launched a murder hunt. Mother of 3, Joanne Hamer, has been found strangled in her bed. Husband Ian has mysteriously disappeared since a row reported by neighbours in the early hours of the morning. And this doesn't seem to be the first either.
I guess people on the road had heard these things where it really went bad, to say the least. None of the neighbours who I spoke to liked him at all.
With Ian Hamer now under suspicion, Humberside Police make an urgent appeal for his whereabouts. They release the details of his car, a white BMW 5 Series. They also warn the public not to approach him.
Once a decision had been made by the senior investigating officer that Ian Hamer was a suspect, for this crime, then a manhunt would have taken place. They don't know at the moment where he is, but there would be certain fast-track actions raised to secure his arrest. You know, checks with family and friends. Where does he usually go to? Where does he work? Checks with hospitals as well. If he's got a mobile phone, has he made any calls? We may be able to cell site to where he's located and instigate an area search. He's clearly got use of a vehicle in this case. So, you know, we've been putting the vehicle details onto the automatic number plate recognition, the ANPR system. And as soon as that vehicle passes an ANPR camera, then that will send an alert to the police. All these inquiries made to trace and arrest Ian Hamer.
He plainly was the last person with her and had disappeared from the scene. So the investigation then was focusing on building that picture around what had happened between them. And then going further back, what had happened between them, not just on that night, but also in the period leading up to this.
Detectives put Ian Hamer under the microscope.
The picture that emerged from witnesses was of somebody who was supremely self-assured, self-confident, and superficially was, or at least on the face of it, was somebody who was quite engaging and interesting. But those same people always spoke about, the more they got to know him, there appeared to be another side to him. And they also described how, over time, he could present as being very self-interested and, I suppose, conceited. So there was somebody who could, when he wanted to present in a way which was superficially attractive, but the more people got to know him, there was to him which was unattractive in terms of him being controlling, perhaps aggressive.
And after speaking to Joanne's family and friends, it turns out Hamer has a checkered history.
There have been a number of previous reports made indicating domestic violence. You know, he was reported to have ripped up her wedding dress.
There's reports of him tearing up a teddy bear, which was sentimental to her.
You know, this is really significant in a case such as this.
The police had been called out on many occasions, but as is so often the case, they weren't really ever progressed. Part of that was because of the approach of the family to try and manage what was happening within the family. The personality of Joanne Hamer was, tragically, to try and make it work at all times.
When you've married someone for so long, you want to, make things work. And she shouldn't be wrongly thought about for wanting to make her marriage with her husband of 27 years and 3 children work. It's just that he was so far gone and so far twisted.
There are a number of occasions where she left him, but he managed to persuade her to come back. And I've investigated, sadly, domestic homicides where controlling and abusive husbands have tried to isolate their wives, and we know that Hamer did this and, dissuading her from contact with family and friends.
In 2013, police discover this came to a head when Ian Hamer started divorce proceedings, blaming the involvement of Joanne's mother in their relationship.
So, he was antagonistic towards his wife's relationship with her own mother. So he was all about controlling and being abusive towards his wife and driving a wedge between her and family and friends. And it just shows this controlling and coercive and bullying and domineering nature of Ian Hamer towards his wife within that relationship. And that isn't uncommon in domestic homicide cases, sadly.
It seems the couple reconciled, but then in 2017, things take another turn for the worse. Ian Hamer starts accusing his wife of having affairs. Police analysis of Joanne's smartphone reveals something even more sinister. Around this time, Hamer hacked into his wife's handset so he could track her every move.
He would apparently follow her to work, follow her on nights out with friends, monitor her phone on where she was going, where she was at, wouldn't let her do certain things, apparently, wear certain things, and she was a bit closed off.
This is how obsessive he was about his wife and his jealousy and his thought processes, that he wanted to accuse her of extramarital affairs.
And a probe of the couple's bank accounts shows Ian's disturbingly tight grip over her purse strings.
He was keeping money from her, basically, like, I guess sort of giving her an allowance of what to spend and what she could do, and wouldn't let her go out at certain times. All the bearings of, you know, a toxic, horrible relationship. Obviously, she felt trapped. She felt like she needed to get out, and she tried to do that. He wouldn't let her.
In the weeks before her death, Joanne had moved out and was considering buying a property. But she was persuaded by Ian to return, 2 days before her murder. It was on this day, the 4th of May, that police background checks reveal a disturbing incident. Ian Hamer had been arrested for drink driving.
As well as being controlling and abusive towards his wife, he seemed to be losing control of his own life in some respects. He was drinking more heavily. So there's a clear pattern there of his own destructive behaviour escalating within himself, and particularly abusing alcohol as part of that process.
Investigators discover it's not only drink that's fueling Hamer's abusive behaviour.
He had a cocaine problem that had become prevalent in his life over the last 2 or 3 years, and that became worse and worse and worse. When he picked up this addiction, maybe his personality changed because of that, and his health, mental and physical, deteriorated.
Businessman Ian Hamer's respectable lifestyle is now questionable. And when they learn what he did in the hours following the estimated time of Joanne's murder, they're convinced they have the right man. Soon after that last blazing row reported by neighbours, Joanne's mother said she had an unsettling phone call with her son-in-law.
When family members tried to contact her the following morning, he told them that Joanne Hamer couldn't speak to them because she was unwell, and as he framed it, she had a sore throat.
Chillingly, police believe Joanne was already dead when Hamer made that calculating comment.
Just, like, sick. Like, strangle her, and then you got to tell her mum that she can't come because she's got a bad throat. Like, sadistic. Like, horrible. When you hear that, it's just like, I don't know what to say. Horrible.
And it appears Hamer used the same story again.
His son had attended at the marital home at a time when Joanne Hamer was probably dead, and that's when he first introduced that concept of her having a sore throat, when he knew she'd been strangled and she was probably dead.
He also told his son as well, when he was at the house, to go and buy some lozenges because his mother was sleeping, she had a bad throat, knowing full well that he'd strangled her, which, now we know what happened, was particularly chilling in this case. To say that she'd got a bad throat, I mean, how callous is that?
And therefore the question is, was that him being cruel, or was it him buying time?
This cunning ploy tells police they have a calculating killer on the run, who wants to stay one step ahead of them. But it's only a matter of time before a false move by Hamer would reveal where he's hiding. Werleby, North Lincolnshire. Murder suspect Ian Hamer is on the run after his wife Joanne is found strangled in their bedroom.
And this is a man who, at this point, everyone in the area is looking for and knows that, okay, this is a manhunt.
As police cast their search net wider, reporters like Charlie Wilson are on the ground looking for leads. Suddenly, that morning, there's word from nearby Barton-upon-Humber.
We heard news that there might be an incident in Barton where he might be. And so we went to Barton and then heard he was seen near a pub.
Barton is about 8 miles away, and it's quite big, quite a lot of people, so it's the obvious place to go. You've got the Humber Bridge. From the Humber Bridge, you've got the whole of Yorkshire to go into and disappear. It would be a logical place to go.
A resident next to one of the town's car parks spots a man behaving erratically.
He was basically swaying around in the car park, making noise, acting strange.
Not realising it's Humberside Police's most wanted, Ian Hamer, the woman calls 999 to report a disturbance.
I think she reported that he was on Spice and shouting. Obviously, he was actually drunk, intoxicated on whatever he was on. He would wander around the car park, shout.
A lone patrol officer heads to the car park to move this wild drunkard on.
Police basically just found a man shouting and being strange and realised this is Ian Hamer. Arrested him straight away.
The officer single-handedly tackles Hamer to the floor, then restrains him whilst he radios for assistance.
I have to say the actions of the officer that arrested him were exemplary, you know, real bravery shown in tackling this individual. And when he was arrested, you know, he actually had to detain him. This is a rural force. It's not an inner-city force with the same number of resources.
Meanwhile, roving reporter Charlie Wilson is close by. Suddenly, he's alerted to the breaking news.
A woman sent me a picture of a man on the floor being sat on by a police officer. Okay, that's our man. So we know exactly where it is. I'm actually at a shop getting a drink of Lucozade. Run around with my Lucozade in hand. So I arrive at the scene. Ian Hamer is being sat on by a lone police officer, waiting for his fellow officers to come. So to come round the corner and see a police officer sat on who we believe is Ian Hamer was just wild, yeah.
After struggling to contain Hamer for nearly 5 minutes alone, backup finally arrives for the officer.
They must have came, got half a second after I came round the corner, and then police swarmed on him, got him away, and sort of like ushered us away. Clearly intoxicated, drunk or drugs or both, not in his right frame of mind, in the clothes that he was wearing the night before. We get him up, handcuff him, escort him to the back of the van.
Meanwhile, news of an arrest for Joanne's murder filters back to her village of Werleby. Residents can now breathe a sigh of relief.
I was just pleased he'd been caught for the crime, but to then find out that it was her husband, it was a real shock.
Detectives start to piece together what Hamer's been up to in the last 24 hours since fleeing the murder scene.
He went off on what can only be described as a drink and drugs binge. We know that from the inquiries that were made. Laughing and joking, you know, certainly no signs of remorse or distress.
Bar owner Pauline Dickinson had reported serving Ian Hamer. But when he arrived on her premises, she had no idea he was on the run.
He came in the pub around 5:30, never seen him before, asked for a pint of Carling. He got his pint of Carling and went and sat down out the way of everybody.
Next, Hamer returns to the bar and starts to hit the spirits. Soon the conversation heads in a strange and unsettling direction.
Put the tequila on the bar and he literally looked either side of himself, leant over the bar and said to me, why did the Mexican push his wife off the cliff? So I did the same as he did, looked either side and said, to kill her? He went, no, you know it. I said, yeah, I do. He paid for his drinks, went and sat down. He came back to the bar 10, 15 minutes later and stood there.
Then Pauline clocked something sinister.
He hid his arm behind, but I'd already seen that he'd got scratches. I don't know which way, it was just you could see scratches on his wrist. One of my customers noticed scratches as well and went, oh, he's one of those who's been harming. One of my customers said to him, hey up mate, what are you doing in here? Are you from here? He says, no, he said, I'm not from here. I'm just going through a breakup with my wife. So he went, oh, right, sorry to hear that, mate. He went, yeah, she's taken me for all my money. So he says, don't be sad. He said, have another drink. So one of the customers bought him a drink.
Over the next few hours, Hamer knocks back the drinks, laughing and joking with the regulars.
So he did about 2 more jokes to the point where the customer said, no wonder your wife left you. If you've got jokes like that, he went, that's maybe why she's gone then.
Quite significantly as well, he was seen to take his wedding ring off. So he knows what's happened. He knows that his wife's dead. So, you know, that's quite a significant gesture. And that was done, you know, merely hours after he'd actually killed his wife. And it just shows the kind of individual that he is.
Some of the pub regulars seem unsettled by this customer they've never seen before, who has struck up conversation with another man at the bar.
My 2 regulars, they finished their drinks. I went, right, you 2 go in. I went, no, we're not going. Says, why? We're not leaving you with them 2. We don't know the other guys, so we're not leaving you with them. I went, oh, don't be daft. What are these 2 going to do to me? I'll soon have them out the door, don't worry. So they went, no, we're staying. So they stayed.
Soon the bar's regulars saw glimpses of another side to their joking acquaintance, who's going by a false name, Sebastian.
So we played pool against one of my regulars, who is a really good player. And during the game, there was banter going on. But right at the end, when the customer knew he was going to win, he picked up the broom that I'd got out ready to clean up and potted Black with the broom. Which Sebastian said, that is so disrespectful to do that. He said, I don't think so, I still won. I don't think he was very pleased and finished his drink, and he did actually walk out. You just get a feeling about people. You know if they're not okay. I don't think he would have done any harm, but who knows?
Next morning, Pauline's alerted to the terrifying news on Facebook that the customer she had served the night before isn't called Sebastian, but Ian Hamer. And he's wanted by police for murder.
My reaction was, oh my God. So I phoned a policeman that I know, and within 5-10 minutes, I think, they'd got him.
Soon, the joke Hamer told Pauline about a man pushing his wife off a cliff takes on a sinister new meaning.
It was weird, but they were just jokes like, you know what, a kid would come home and tell you jokes, but it's not until the following day, and I actually thought to myself, it's as if he was trying to tell us something. I don't know. It's not until the following day that things fell into place.
Despite his intoxicated state, Ian Hamer engages with the police at the point of his arrest.
He says something like, it wasn't murder, it was manslaughter. Something along those lines. I heard the word manslaughter.
he did make a very significant statement, an unsolicited comment to the officer indicating that he wasn't guilty of murder. It was diminished responsibility, so he was already offering up a statutory defence to murder.
After 24 hours on the run, Ian Hamer has been arrested in North Lincolnshire on suspicion of murder. Just hours after killing his wife, Joanne, Hamer was spotted in Pauline's bar, just 7 miles away from the crime scene.
You just would not have thought he'd actually killed his wife and just come blazingly into a bar a few miles away having a drink. When you hear them things, it's like, really? Could you be so cold-blooded and heartless?
When police take him in for questioning, Hamer repeats his claims that he committed manslaughter due to mental illness. But one throwaway comment soon after his arrest suggests this is a cunning ploy to reduce any impending prison sentence.
And what was a telling piece of evidence? He said to the officers who were tending to him, this was manslaughter, and asked this question: have we done enough for diminished responsibility? This was a man who was trying to present a picture of being so mentally unwell that he was not to be held fully responsible for his wife's death.
This is clearly somebody who's a very manipulative, selfish individual. And his response, he's already trying to escape justice for his crime as soon as he's arrested, and he's clearly given a great deal of thought to that before his arrest. And Ian Hamer clearly only cares about one person, and that's Ian Hamer.
In spite of Hamer's claims, he's charged with his wife's murder. Months later, mental health experts are brought in to provide a true picture of Hamer's state of mind.
After his arrest, he was subsequently interviewed by two psychiatrists to explore whether there were any mental illness elements that would lead to diminished responsibility.
They ask him probing questions about his relationship with wife Joanne.
He began to present what was ultimately going to be his defence. He accepted he had killed her, but in the context where he said he didn't want to do it, and used the phrase that it was some sort of psychotic episode.
Then Hamer starts to go on the offensive, claiming he is the real victim in the abusive marriage.
Ian Hamer claimed that his wife had taunted him to say that their children weren't his. He made a slur on his wife's character, saying she was engaged in extramarital affairs. There's no evidence of this.
He would say that she would see other people, that she would be on dating apps and she would find other men more attractive than him. And anyone who knew Joanne knows that that's just completely laughable and a joke. She was the most loyal woman you could meet. Just sort of making up excuses in his head, I guess, to find ways and motives to do what he did.
Then his claims turn even more extreme.
He made plain that he was himself a victim of domestic abuse. You know, he claims that she hit him over the head with a shoe. We've got no information about any injury, or certainly any serious injury to him. He claims she threw a phone at him. Again, there was no injury that we're aware of to support that. This was all seen as a tissue of lies. And clearly the people that knew Joanne had not seen any evidence of this whatsoever. And the only person who could suggest that this had taken place was Ian Hamer himself.
But soon, the psychiatrists start to uncover Hamer's true colours.
What was actually found by two psychiatrists, one diagnosed him with morbid jealousy and one with obsessive jealousy. But clearly, there wasn't an element of diminished responsibility for his actions. For From the facts we know about the case and his behaviour and his actions, come as no surprise, because we can see the way that he jealously controlled his wife's movements and behaviour, you know, a real controlling nature.
And when detectives scan Hamer's smartphone, the picture he painted as the victim starts to crumble. Just days before Joanne's murder, they find texts he sent to another woman promising jewellery.
Things he was doing, he would accuse her for. He was seeing other women that came out. He was on dating apps. He would accuse her of the things that he was doing exactly the same.
We do know that Ian Hamer had affairs, he had one-night stands, and he accused his wife of the same. There's no evidence to suggest that that was the case.
But investigators are blown away when they uncover the name Hamer uses on his dating profile. It sounds strikingly familiar.
He'd use a fake name. Sebastian, apparently. He would use to women wherever he was going to maybe go out on these dates and meet people. And yeah, to use a fake name, like you're obviously up to something that's not good.
15 months after Joanne's murder, husband Ian Hamer is finally put on trial at Hull Crown Court. He pleads guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. But the prosecution sets out the case for cold-blooded murder.
So it was a consideration for the jury whether that was a man demonstrating real symptoms of mental illness, or whether it was somebody using any illness to formulate a defence.
The court is told the torrid details of the abuse Hamer inflicted on his wife.
The question that was raised with the jury is whether or not, by the time of the killing, he in effect wanted to get rid of his wife so he could move on, but he needed control of that situation, and that's how we presented the case.
As the trial progresses, even Hamer's own children take to the stand against their own father to describe the abuse suffered in their own home.
One of them spoke of being aware of that from a very young age, and become increasingly toxic and abusive. You then see the horrible human side of this, because they're being required to give evidence against one of their parents, and in circumstances where they've lost the other one. And for them, there's no good outcome to any of this.
Following a heart-wrenching 3-week trial, the jury retires to consider their verdict.
The verdict of the jury was that Ian Hamer was guilty of murder. Therefore, they rejected that idea that his mental state was such that he was not able to exercise proper judgment and control.
He designed everything, including his response to the arresting officer, to make out that this was the case, that it was diminished responsibility. Thankfully, the jury didn't buy that, and they saw through Ian Hamer's excuses for what they were, just excuses.
Hamer's jailed for life with a minimum of 22 years. At the time of sentencing, the judge takes into account the years of domestic violence Joanne's verdict. Would Michael Reader once again walk away a free man?
Once the jury went out to deliberate on their verdicts, we really were as confident as we could be, even though it can always go wrong with a jury. And I have done a number of cases over the years in which a jury has come back with a verdict that was not expected.
After 3 days of deliberating, the jury returns its verdict. Stephen Welch is found guilty of murder. Michael Reader is found guilty of murder.
So We sat there in the court and they said guilty, and I just looked down and just started crying. Relief, you know, we've got justice for my mum.
You don't feel like there's anything to celebrate when the verdict comes in. It's very sad all round, you know. We've lost our mum, their families have lost someone in their family to prison, and it's just, there's just no one wins in that situation. No one comes out any the better.
On 21st of December 2020, just over a year after the brutal murder, Michael Reeder is sentenced to life, with a minimum term of 31 years. Stephen Welch is jailed for a minimum of 27 years.
We were pleased with the sentencing, and the judge's sentencing remarks were great. She knew what they'd done. She sentenced them accordingly. It sends a message that this behaviour, that in this county you're not going to get away with that sort of thing. I'm sure that will be something the family will take heart in. Not from a vindictive point of view, from a point of view that he won't do anyone else any harm.
I think that Michael Reeder was motivated by loss of control. He lost control of Marion. She had the audacity to leave him.
Despite the sentences, the pain of losing their mum is something Marion's family will live with forever.
The way I feel now is a bit empty, lost, but, you know, we're getting there. Living life for her. Just, we're not going to let it break us, or, you know, we're going to be happy, and I still sing around the kitchen and clean. Not as much as she cleans, but, you know, I'm trying. And we're getting together and we're making memories with the boys, and we just talk about her all the time.
When I think about my mum and our memories, they're always happy memories. They're always filled with a lot of laughter, a lot of fun, just having a good time. My memories are very happy times, and that's something that can't be taken away.
The team lurched from one crisis to another with an enemy that is impossible to predict. Cobra Cyber War is new Thursday at 9 on Sky Mix. Please be aware that this program also contains themes of domestic violence.
It's unusual that a murder offence is captured on CCTV. Very harrowing.
Police boys, there's actually a dead body in the ditch.
Couldn't even recognise her. Black eyes. Everything was just basically swollen and bruised.
He's an animal. Really, he's destroyed my family.
They started like kicking me and punching me, and I was terrified.
We had to take a dangerous offender off the streets.
He's just evil. He's took a mother away from her 5 children. That's the monster.
Ten miles south of Birmingham lies the pretty Worcestershire village of Hopwood.
Hopwood is what I would describe as a rural area. Lots of country lanes.
Very peaceful and tranquil. That's the kind of thing you'd expect from this kind of place.
You've got the canal down there. You've got a couple of nice pubs. It's just lovely.
It's a very sleepy village. There's obviously not much traffic coming around here. Everyone knows everybody in the village.
They look out for each other, they can go to each other to ask for help. It's a really tight-knit community.
But the peace of this rural idyll is about to be shattered.
Emergency, which service?
Police, please.
Police emergency.
Hello, yeah. Sorry, I'm just walking my dog up the lane at the moment. There's actually a dead body in the ditch.
Just before 6 a.m. on that morning, dog walker walking his dog in Wast Hills Lane, and the dog came across a pile of leaves. And the dog walker then discovered there was blood underneath the leaves.
I just saw a pile of blood on the road, and I thought, where's all that come from? The dog's gone to a ditch, and I thought, oh, somebody's dumped rubbish, and then I could see an hand and a leg. I thought, oh, sorry.
It is the body of a woman in her 30s.
And obviously that prompted an emergency response from police and the ambulance service.
To find a scene like that is incredibly shocking, especially in this area.
Might have been hit by a car. I'm not sure. Can you get them as quick as you can?
Medics pronounce the woman dead, and it is deemed as a potential hit and run.
Upon receiving the report, the police attended the location and immediately set up a crime scene, preventing others from accessing the road, so that the investigations can begin into what had happened and how it had happened.
West Mercia's Detective Chief Inspector Jerry Smith heads up the investigation.
We're currently standing in Wast Hills Lane, in the actual inner cordon in the scene itself. The pool of blood was located around this area. And then what you actually had as well were drag marks in blood leading across the road, which was obviously where the body had been dragged to place it in the ditch. The body was covered in debris and vegetable matter. When I initially attended the scene, officers thought that it could have been a non-stop fatal road traffic collision.
The grim discovery becomes the talk of the village.
This must have been a huge shock for the local residents, finding out that a body had been discovered in their locality.
That kind of, concern, because this is a place where things don't happen very often, would have been high, really high level.
Everybody did talk about it, and we were all going, oh my God, was she walking? Because we used to walk down that a lot. We used to go a nice long walk down to the canal.
I was keenly aware that going forward it was highly likely to raise significant concerns within that area, particularly at that time because we didn't have an identification of the body and we didn't know what type of incident we were actually dealing with.
But investigators have their work cut out, trying to establish what actually happened and the identity of the motorist who potentially hit her, then drove off.
The rural nature of the scene obviously means that we're going to get less likelihood of CCTV evidence and witness evidence because, as you can see, there's nobody around, just causing complexities to the investigation.
The police carry out an immediate investigation. They will have spoken to witnesses at the houses nearby, knocking on doors to see if anybody had heard or seen anything at the time, as well as conducting painstaking CCTV inquiries to try and identify the movements of the deceased.
The next priority in an investigation like this is to identify the body, to work out who this woman is.
The police identified a rucksack at the scene. Inside that rucksack was a mobile phone.
Fingerprints and DNA swabs were taken from the phone, and then it was opened up and identification details from the handset, from the SIM were taken, and then by making inquiries with the telecommunications provider, we managed to identify through our intelligence systems that it was Kerry. Kerry Owen was a 35-year-old mother of 5 children. She was initially from the Peterborough area.
The first Kerry's family hear about her death is via her boyfriend, Alan Edney.
It was 27th of May, and I sat at home, and my son received a phone call saying Kerry had died in a hit and run in Birmingham.
I was in my granddad's living room and he got the call and then he told me. He said that your mum has passed away. Everyone was just upset and shocked.
I got a phone call and he said to me that they were out camping and she ran off and got hit by a car and the car drove off.
And he says, we was running across the farmer's field and there was a gateway. He says, I think I thought I slipped and went through the gateway and I looked at the side of me and Kerry lay there with a hole in her head. And I see a black Peugeot 206 in the distance.
Obviously, I broke down, like, I was literally in tears. One of my sister's mates who I lived with, he broke down. He just hugged me and he goes, we're going to get justice for her one way.
Obviously, I was upset. You know, she's my friend. I've always looked out for her and I felt let down that I couldn't protect her because I've always been there to protect her.
She was a kind-hearted person. You know, she'd do anything for anybody.
She would always look after Kyrie, who's my oldest son, buy him new clothes, feed him, change him. They would always be together.
Everyone really loved her, you know, like she was just like adorable and that.
While Kerry's family try to come to terms with the devastating news, investigators are examining the scene to try to establish what actually happened.
In the addresses nearby, some of those addresses had CCTV, and a vehicle had been seen leaving West Hills Lane at about 4 a.m. And relatively quickly, by attending a local address, we were able to work out that was highly likely to be somebody that lived at one of those addresses and that was going to work. We were subsequently able to find that car and just reassure ourselves there was no damage or blood or anything on that car consistent with a road traffic collision.
DCI Smith also has other concerns when he re-examines the scene.
I found it immediately unusual that anyone would have stopped in those circumstances and particularly made the effort to cover up blood and deposit the body in a ditch and then cover the body as well. The lack of any tyre marks, the lack of any vehicle debris, to me indicated that it was not a road traffic collision.
And officers speaking to local residents also suspect all is not as it seems.
During some of the initial witness trawling, people had heard voices in the road.
CCTV from a nearby address points towards the area in the lane where the voices are coming from.
It didn't cover the scene, but crucially what it did have was audio. At approximately 4:05 that morning, you start to hear voices. It's difficult to hear, but it's clear there's two people and that someone is distressed, and then gradually those voices turn into screaming. There's some significant instance of violence occurring at that time in the road, and that lasts for about 5 minutes. I wasn't dealing with a road traffic collision, and it was highly likely to be a homicide.
In Hopwood, Worcestershire, 35-year-old mother of 5, Kerry Owen, has been found dead by the roadside in mysterious circumstances. After viewing nearby CCTV just hours before her body is discovered, police now suspect Kerry was murdered as she walked along Wast Hill Lane.
You hear parents screaming, and then later on, we hear more screaming. This is particularly significant because of the gap between the screaming that you hear may indicate 2 separate attacks.
"40 metres before Kerry's final resting place, police uncover evidence of that first attack.
This is the scene of what I think could have been the initial attack site, with blood was found on the ground, and in fact a dislodged tooth was found in this area as well by the fingertip search. There was also some orange debris in the road. Officers thought it was a cigarette lighter, so straight away it became obvious there were 2 separate attack sites, 2 assaults. And that is then potentially corroborated by what you hear on the CCTV. There is a gap between the screaming, which may be consistent with an assault in one location, either Kerry moving herself or being dragged to the second location where she was finally killed.
When the post-mortem results come back, they reveal more about what happened to Kerry.
The pathologist found that Kerry had essentially been subjected to a savage beating. She had over 80 injuries on her body.
She suffered significant facial injuries. She had fractures to her nose. She had a tooth knocked out. She had a fracture to the hyoid bone in her neck. The injuries were terrible.
The final conclusion was that Kerry had died from blunt force trauma. Basically, she had been beaten to death.
We obviously had to identify her. You couldn't even recognise her. She was all swollen, she had black eyes, they'd had to shave all her hair off. Everything was just basically swollen and bruised.
She had a hole in her head. Obviously, I wanted to go and see her, and my niece, she was like, "Nah, don't, because it's going to scar you for life." She goes, "It's not a nice sight."
I just felt sick, you know, to think that how can somebody do that to somebody who won't even fight back? Kerry wouldn't have fought back.
The injuries are more consistent with a sustained attack. They aren't really consistent with a hit and run. So that's question marks over Alan Edney's story.
Her boyfriend's claims that she'd been hit by a black Peugeot 206 during their camping trip also don't add up.
If that happened to me, I'd be devastated. I'd be crying my eyes out. I'd be absolutely destroyed. He was so calm.
I thought it was a bit funny because I've known Kerry 21 years. Kerry doesn't do camping, you know, so I thought that seemed a bit strange.
I used to buy and sell cars and everything. I've never seen a Peugeot 206 black one in years. Must be a proper collector's car. It was unbelievable.
The last photos taken by Kerry's phone confirms the couple had indeed been camping in nearby woods. Officers seek out and find their campsite. But something else about Alan's story doesn't stack up.
Edney's account was that they had come from the campsite and for some reason decided to have a race. He'd got caught in the gate, and as that happened, he'd heard the sound of a collision and Kerry being hit by a vehicle, which didn't stop. And it just doesn't make sense that they would have climbed over this gate and she'd have been hit by a car. We're now hundreds of yards from the location where Kerry's body was found. The road traffic collision just didn't stand any scrutiny. Alan Edney basically told some of Kerry's family members he had in fact called the police and an ambulance, and he had then attended a local hospital with Kerry where she was pronounced deceased.
He describes to his grandmother actually that he's had a statement taken by a police officer who had then dropped him back.
We found no evidence of any of that at all.
With Edney now firmly in their sights as a suspect, detectives dig deeper into his history with Kerry.
Kerry Owen first met Edney in March 2020 via a dating site.
I remember her saying to me she'd met a man on the internet from Birmingham.
And within a week, she moved to Birmingham with him.
First time we went down, we met him in the town centre and he seemed lovely.
I told her to really come back to Peterborough so she could be with her family, but she said no, she met the man of her dreams, basically.
All Kerry wanted in life was to be loved, and, you know, if somebody told her they loved her straight away, Kerry would be all for that, if you know what I mean. So she was sort of a bit vulnerable when it comes around relationships.
But barely a month into the budding romance, cracks begin to show.
She phoned me and told me that he was beating her up. And that's when I asked her, you know, to come back to Peterborough, to her dad's house, or come to my house. But, you know, she obviously stayed there.
She stayed in contact for a couple of months, then all of a sudden the phone calls stopped, Facebook stopped. I kept texting her, are you okay, are you okay? Nothing come back. We're worrying about her. Then the next thing, Kerry's texted me, she says he's in prison.
In 2021, there was a serious incident where Kerry and Alan's mum had taken a short holiday to Blackpool, and that resulted in a serious assault where Alan assaulted Kerry and his mum.
I think she rang me, she FaceTimed me and told me that he'd just been arrested, and she showed me her face and she had some, I think, some grazes or black eye. She had been in the hospital. She told me she'd been in the hospital. She had marks on her belly because he had stamped on her belly.
So I went there. That's when she told me as well she was pregnant with his baby.
For a man to assault his own mother and also assault his partner, especially when she's pregnant, kind of really paints the picture of the kind of man that Edney was, with this violent streak that ran through him.
I was obviously really shocked, and I was confused as well because he was obviously acting so nice when we went to Birmingham. But I was confused.
She was still sticking up for him. When you're in them kind of relationships, it's kind of hard to get out.
Edney is jailed for 6 months for the assault on Kerry and his mother.
She stayed in contact while he was in prison. It was like we'd got our niece back and the kids had got their mum back. Then all of a sudden the contact stopped again.
Unfortunately, Kerry did maintain contact with Alan when he was in prison.
Chill mà, hai vợ chồng ấy đi xe nhá, giá anh thấy đi xe cứ ôm nhau kiểu chill lắm. Và như vậy là mình đã sử dụng xong màu xanh lá cây rồi, và bây giờ mình sẽ cất màu xanh lá cây này đi. Và mình sẽ sử dụng tiếp là màu xanh nước biển nhá. Mình sẽ sử dụng màu xanh nước biển này để tô cái phần yên xe.
Tiếp theo mình sẽ tô sang đôi tai còn lại của chú chó này nha.
Nhưng mà tính ra là mình cũng bị ngọng ấy. Mình bị nói giọng vùng miền nhiều ấy.
Biết gì đâu.
Lên đây mới bị biết là mình bị nói giọng vùng miền nhiều.
Sao bằng thằng Vĩnh Phúc được, thằng miền miến. Nói buồn cười lắm, nó mới Vĩnh Phúc rồi mà nó nói nghe nó hài hài. Nhiều cái nữa. Mình không biết. Cười.
Phúc là sát Hà Nội rồi.
Không biết được thằng này nó kiểu gì. Không biết người thủ sao ấy. Chắc người cạnh sông nó thế.
Phúc là có gì? Tam Đảo à?
Sau đó mình sẽ tô phần khuôn mặt của chú chó này bằng một cái màu vàng đậm nha. Đây là màu vàng đậm của mình này.
Bây giờ mình phải buôn bán cái gì nữa bây giờ. Người ta buôn bán hàng xỉ lẻ thép kho ấy. Và mình cũng sẽ tô cái yên đằng trước này nữa nha.
Nãy ra Jollibee đông vãi cứt. Mấy cả không thấy ai cầm con gấu hết. Thế thôi tự biết, tự hiểu.
Cái gì cơ?
Nãy ra Jollibee xếp hàng từ trong cái chỗ quầy đấy đến tận cửa.
Hôm qua em đặt đơn ấy, đúng 1 tiếng rưỡi mới giao. Vì kiểu bị hôm nay kiểu người ta bảo trước là hôm nay kiểu bọn em chạy chương trình ấy, rất là nhiều, bây giờ ở đấy đông ơi là đông ấy. Mà em lần đầu tiên em nghe kiểu gọi mà nó bị ồn như thế, tại vì tất cả các khâu đều đang ồn hết lên ấy. Chạy liên tục.
Nhưng mà ta không thấy ai ôm con gấu nào hết nên là thôi, đi về.
Sao phải cho ôi ở đây về hết rồi.
Không biết, thấy ngồi ăn các thứ bàn chả thấy con gấu nào. Nhìn này hiểu mà. Sướng quá, Nhung giờ nó đi Sapa ấy, đã quá. Giờ con Nhung nó đang đi Sapa rồi, sướng quá. Nhà nó đi.
Vừa đi Sapa thích mà.
Có 2 nhà thôi mà đi Sapa thuê xe 16 chỗ. Có 2 nhà tầm 8 người. Thuê mẹ xe 16 chỗ. Tao muốn đi lắm.
2 người ấy thì đi xe 6 chỗ cũng không được, 7 chỗ cũng không được. 9 chỗ thì hơi chật, còn đồ nữa.
Liên quan gì, cốp có mà.
Cốp thì chị nhìn 8 người bao nhiêu cái vani, 8 cái vani thì cái chỗ nào chứa được.
Trời trời, nói gì ghê quá. 16 chỗ gấp đôi. Ai, buồn quá, sao nó không gợi ý là Thảo ơi lên đi, lên liền luôn đấy. Gì, biết đâu tao đi mày đòi đi theo.
Sao biết?
Buồn thế.
Chán nhỉ?
Nhà mình không có cái đi du lịch như thế bao giờ hết.
Chả có kiểu đi du lịch theo gia đình ấy nhỉ?
Nhà mày còn đi chứ nhà tao mày không đi bao giờ này.
Em chả có đi du lịch gia đình, kiểu em cũng không ấy lắm.
Bố mẹ mày chưa chở nhau đi bao giờ?
Bố mẹ em có, 2 bố mẹ đi còn em ở nhà.
Thế là tại mày rồi.
Tại vì em không ấy lắm.
Thế còn kêu gì nhà tao kìa. Đi
Nhà mày đi Hải Phòng không? Đâu hè đâu.
Mà Hiền nữa hả?
Không. Chị rồi bán chị đi tàu. Đi tàu ở ga Hà Nội ấy.
Ra đấy để trải nghiệm cảm giác bị lừa ở Hải Phòng. Hết lừa Hà Nội giờ ra Hải Phòng để nó lừa tiếp.
Sao Hải Phòng có lừa lắm đâu. Không có vụ gì đâu.
Cứ ra khu du lịch rồi biết.
Nhưng mà mình có làm gì đâu mà lừa.
Gì, ăn uống các thứ.
Hấp vừa thôi. Chị rủ thằng Cánh đi.
Đéo, thằng mén mén cho ở nhà.
Có 80 mấy nghìn một vé.
Đấy.
Buổi chiều.
Xong ra đấy mình ở đâu?
Thuê phòng.
Đã ha.